Tony looked through the window with his jaw dropped to the ground. The power those two Dragonborns showed was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was 10 against 2, with all the bandits in the 4-star realm. Yet, they were swiftly and decisively defeated by 2 demi-humans who were only in the 3-star realm. Even though he was just a chef, Tony knew how impossible this all seemed. The Dragonborns didn't even break a sweat. Michael, yeah, Zion was a bit too careless with his punches. The restaurant is a mess, Michael said, looking at a large hole in the wall filled with rubble and glass shards. Not only that, but there were about 3 tables and 6 chairs that were completely destroyed, lowering the capacity for the restaurant. TSK. We warned him about this. Now, Shiano will be forced to lower his chicken allotment for the week, Michael said disappointedly. They defeated those bandits. Tony shouted. How did they even do that? That's just normal, one of the Rebornian chefs said. And upon hearing this, the little Remy couldn't help but gleam an excited smile. Really? Then does that mean I can be as cool as those big brothers? Michael nodded. Of course. Then I'll be an ass-kicking chef in the future. I'll not only serve a juicy fried chicken, but also a swift kick of justice. Remy proclaimed, with stars almost forming in his eyes. Oh, how cute, little Remy. Ho, quite an exciting chef you'll be in the future. We're looking forward to it. Little Remy, worry about that after you don't forget about plucking all the feathers in the chicken, okay? The Rebornian chefs all coddled and praised the little boy for his ambitions. Seeing this, Tony couldn't help but slap his own forehead. It seemed that he was the only person in this room who knew how difficult it was to be able to defeat multiple vicious bandits, 1-star realm higher than you. Son, just as Tony was about to tell his son about the harsh reality of something called talent, Michael signaled for him to stop talking. Let him have his dream, Michael said. Who knows? Maybe he will become what he says in the future. Since the little Remy was still 9 years old, Michael didn't know how talented the boy could become. So, he didn't want Tony to influence Remy by saying that he might not have the talent to become as powerful as the Dragonborns. After all, Michael had realized that perception and self-belief could play a part in the development of talent. For example, the Red Hob Mankeys evolved the exact same way that Michael wanted them to evolve once he told them about their new jobs. If it could work in the evolution of demi-humans, then it could possibly work in the talent awakening of a human. Maybe I should focus on the education department of Reborn. Chat JK4, make a note. Understood. Making a mental reminder. Michael, I see more bandits out there. They did say that they have the whole place surrounded. There's more outside. Tony looked through the windows again and peeked through the giant hole in the restaurant. There was a gathering of about 30 or so raggedly dressed men looking down at the 4 knocked-out bandits. They all took out knives from their waists, wielding it with caution as they looked through the restaurant in search of the one who defeated their comrades. Don't worry. We have more people outside, Michael said. The 30 or so bandits stared at the restaurant with more caution. The fact that they were able to defeat the bandana bandit leader and the 9 other bandits meant that they were dealing with a much more difficult situation than expected. Hey, what happened over there? The bandit said as he slapped the unconscious man on the ground. Unfortunately, he was totally knocked out. If he wasn't, he could have warned them to retreat now before they faced those Dragonborns. TSK, are they slacking off? How dare they get knocked out by a bunch of civilians, one of the bandits said. How embarrassing of them. Let's teach these civilians a hard lesson. We'll storm the restaurant together. On 3 we go. 1, 2. Before he could finish his sentence, the bandit suddenly felt something tugging at his feet, causing him to fall forwards. Ow! What the? He looked at his lower body and saw a shadow wrapped itself around his shins. Then, his eyes naturally saw a large, intimidating orc standing behind him. It had a great furry mane around its neck, with its muscles even bigger than his head. He couldn't even understand where the orc had come from. Anyone among them should have sensed the approach of such a big creature like him. Yet when he looked at the other bandits, he realized he wasn't the only one. He saw them struggling to break free from the shadows that wrapped themselves around them. Some had their arms forcefully strapped to their backs. Some had their legs almost sinking to the ground, and some had almost their entire bodies coated with a dark black material. Arg, what's happening? What are these? Get this away from me. Following the direction of these shadows, the bandits saw an entire horde of orcs standing menacingly behind. Who are you? The bandit screamed at the orcs. Yet, they continued to stand still, not moving an inch and remaining completely silent. It was then that the silence of the night was disrupted by the sounds of multiple hooves crashing on the ground. The disturbance propagated through the earth, causing the bandits to look towards its source. And there, riding in the distance, they saw 10 centaurs rushing at top speeds and leaving behind a cloud of dust behind them. They held humongous lances to the side, ready to skewer the bandits. As they came closer and closer, the centaurs didn't slow down their approach. They rushed even faster, with the very tip of their lances aimed directly at the trapped bandits. Their lances glowed with tremendous red power as the ground beneath their hooves quaked in fear. And as they reached their target, a large explosion erupted from the point of collision. The crash sent the bandits flying off into the air in different directions. The 15 or so unfortunate bandits that took the brunt of the force were immediately incapacitated, with most of their bones broken from the impact and only further exacerbated once they landed harshly on the ground. The other 15 bandits didn't come out unscathed, however. Their small knives were unable to deflect against such a large course of impact, so they were still injured from the initial explosion, with most sustaining broken bones and internal injuries. Yet, they were able to pick themselves back up after landing on the hard concrete ground. Where did they come from? One of the surviving bandits muttered with strained breaths. Blood flowed from his injured forehead. Retreat, he shouted to the other surviving bandits. But before any of them could move, Red Mankeys rushed behind them and knocked them out with one swift hit in the neck. After the bandits were taken care of, Michael came out of the kitchen to assure the customers that this type of thing wouldn't happen again. But surprisingly, instead of being angry that their dining experience was ruined by the bandits, the customers began approaching the Dragonborns and giving them praise. They were impressed by their swift removal of the bandits, even at the cost of some property destruction. Of course, that's just what I do on the regular, Zion boasted, scratching his nose. Jaka hit his younger brother on the head with his sheath. Idiot. You created a hole in the restaurant. Ow! The red-scaled Dragonborn glared at his older brother. What's the big deal? We'll rebuild it anyway. TSK, TSK. It's not the rebuilding that I'm worried about. What do you think will happen to this restaurant once it's under construction? You think they'll still sell chicken? The realization came to pass in Zion's mind like a truck. He held his heart in pain, probably in more pain than what the bandits could have done. Oh no, I've made a terrible mistake. Don't close down the store. Let's just leave it like this. Thankfully, Shiana wasn't here, or else the two of them would have gotten the screaming of a lifetime. Who are these guys again? One of the customers whispered as they looked at Zion and Jocko. They're the Dragonborns, another answered. I thought they weren't real. The rumors were true then, that they could defeat people 1-star realm higher than their own. And did you see those centaurs outside? If they're protecting the Golden Road, then I'll feel safe traveling here. As it turned out, this kind of hostage/robbery situation was normal in this world, especially in the middle of nowhere like this truck stop was located at. Traveling out in the wilderness were usually accompanied with encounters with bandits and monsters. It was normal to fight off either one of them at least once every 3 days of travel time. And in the entire time they used the Golden Road, this was the only instance where they felt any danger at all. That was the reason why they weren't at all fazed by the bandits, and continued to eat their chickens after everything was over. Chef, another order of chicken, one of the customers said, walking around one of the bandit unconscious on the floor as he approached the counter. Michael tapped Tony's shoulder. See that? They're asking for more chicken. Tony absent-mindedly nodded. He was still not over everything that happened tonight. He was the only one reacting normally while everyone was already too jaded. Don't worry. The bandits are all taken care of, Michael said, just as the centaurs picked up every bandit and gathered them into one big circle. But what if they come again? That's why I asked the centaurs to come here for support. You can count on them for security. One of the centaurs approached the kitchen area, ducking down the door as he entered. "Boss, we have all the bandits captured. Good job," Michael praised them. "I was just talking to Tony about your new positions here. I want you to work with the Red Hobmankeys to patrol the Golden Road and prevent something like this from happening again." Michael also asked the leader of the Hobmankeys to enter the conversation, formally introducing the two demi-humans who would one day become the highway patrols of the Golden Road. "Your two groups will work in tandem. Centaurs don't have any problem with being ridden like a horse, right?" The centaur bowed his head. "We will do anything to protect Reborn." "Good. Since you'll be highway patrols, you'll need to be able to catch up to any high-speed troublemakers. I'm expecting a lot from you." The Red Hobmankey leader faced the centaur, and even without exchanging any words, their eyes communicated a common sense of loyalty to Reborn. The two shook hands, solidifying this symbiotic relationship. "We shall work hard." The Red Mankey bowed to Michael. "Your headquarters will be here in the truck stop, but I want regular trips around the Golden Road frequently. I know you're quite short on people right now, but we'll see if we can improve your numbers in the future." There was currently only 10 Red Mankeys in the nation of Reborn, which was why Michael only asked for 10 centaurs to transfer over to the Queen's region. The highway patrol only consisted of 20 for now, but would certainly grow in the future, especially once they found the secret village of the Red Mankeys. "Now, I think it's time to meet with the bandits. Tony, you'll be okay, right?" Tony nodded his head. "I'm still a little rattled, but I'm a lot more at ease now that I know that these people will protect the restaurant." The centaur and the mankey both tapped their chests in confidence. "Don't worry, Papa. I'll protect you in the future." Remy butted in. "I'll become like those dragonborns." Tony looked through the window and saw the two dragonborns almost strangling each other for the last piece of chicken on the plate. Even when the chicken had already fallen on the floor, they still treated it as brand new. "I hope not." Once he settled everything in the restaurant, Michael walked outside and saw the pile of unconscious bandits laying down on the concrete floor. An Orcanine shadow orc approached Michael. "Shall I send him in now, boss?" "Sure," Michael nodded. As the orc used his shadow transport skill to summon a person from afar, Michael used a simple water ball spell to wake up all the sleeping bandits from their slumber. "Of my head, where what happened?" "Ooh." As the bandits slowly regained consciousness, their eyes opened to see a silhouette of a person approaching them. They jerked their injured bodies, only to realize that their hands were cuffed behind them. "Our boss just wants to ask you a few questions," a voice told them. "We won't tell anything," one of the bandits muttered. "You should have just killed me. Everyone here would rather die than submit to another company. Damn, we should have been like Sleazy and just left the group when Flare Corp approached us." The person chuckled. "I didn't leave. I was captured." Sleazy walked closer to the bandits, letting them see his distinct face and sharp chin. They wouldn't mistake him for anyone else. He was the infamous Sleazy who didn't take no for an answer and took anything he wanted. You're here. We thought you were dead. You're with them now." Sleazy looked at the bandits with pity. "I'm not. Yet. I haven't earned it." "Why?" the bandit hoarsely shouted. "You were the personification of a real bandit. Following no laws, no humans, and no morals. What happened to you?" "I was reborn. I should have died and was given a second chance. A better life. And I realized that I had been doing things wrong my entire life. And now, I want all of you to realize that as well." The other bandits looked at Sleazy with doubt, wondering if he was real or a clone. "You'll find out soon enough," Sleazy said with a smile. The bandits, expecting nothing but torture and mistreatment, were caught off guard when they were suddenly all given a piece of McTony's chicken to eat. At first, they thought it was poisoned or something, but as they took a bite, their eyes widened with delightful surprise. "That's just one of the benefits of being a reborn prisoner," Sleazy said to them. After which, 30 or so genin, low shadow, orcs appeared and attached themselves to each of the bandits, transporting them directly to the nation of Reborn, landing them in the open court of the prison. There, they saw all the amenities and all the benefits they were afforded, even though they were only a prisoner. Just the fact that they had something warm to sleep on was already miles better than their lives back in the Bastard Bandit Cave. Not only that, but they were offered amazing food that they wouldn't have been able to buy even if they were stealing as a bandit. Sleazy began the rebirth progress for the bandits. He would become a senior that would help them realize how great their lives were here in Reborn, just like how the infamous Deathclaw taught him how to accept life in the prison. With the first group of bandits secured and imprisoned, Michael and the Rebornians focused on the rest of them still roaming around the Queen's region. What are they planning on doing now? Michael asked Naruto and Sasuke. BU-2. I have sent out my own 50 mid-shadows to survey the area, and we have found a few other groups of bandits lying in wait around the Golden Road. They're targeting our taxis and our buses, Naruto reported. My Orcanine orcs will surely trample those troublemakers without problem. Rahtata. Boss, I did not think that 50 mid-shadows were enough, so I sent out 30 high shadows to accompany our Rebornian drivers during their duties. They'll be protected once the bandits attack, Sasuke said, sneaking a mocking smile at his rival. Huh? Are you saying that my Orcanines are not enough to defeat the bandits? Naruto faced Sasuke, puffing his chest and smacking it hard. I'm just preparing for the worst, Sasuke retorted. This is not the first time that your orcs have failed a mission. What did you say? BU-2. Rahtata. You heard me. Michael raised his hand. Please, leave your rivalry out of this for now. Boss, please assign this mission only to us. I promise you that we will not disappoint you, Sasuke said, spreading out his quills to make himself bigger and coincidentally, shooting out a few spines to his rival. Ow! Keep your grubby quills away from me. Boss, we'll do this mission. My co-chieftain here can't even control his own quills. Can't expect him to execute the mission well with that kind of carelessness. Michael shook his head. For now, since we're just dealing with a bunch of 4-star bandits, I'm not going to assign it to either of you. What? Boss, are you sure? If not us, then who? We'll let our own taxi drivers defend themselves, Michael revealed. Boss, the two orc chieftains simultaneously blurted out. Don't worry, I gave them something to help. Michael wanted to see if the Rebornians could protect themselves without the help of the Shadow Orcs. After all, every single one of them had the lesser unity defense with them and learned basic mystical art spells when they awakened. They should be able to deal with a bunch of bandits easily. Of course, Michael instructed the Shadow Orcs to help the drivers if things got too dicey. Not only that, but he gave them a few trump cards to use that would surely turn the tides of battle. Meanwhile, in a desolate part of the Golden Road a couple of days away from any large civilization, one Reborn taxicab drove through the flat highway at a brisk 60 kilometers per hour. His passenger was a traveling merchant who came to the grafted cluster to pick up some precious herbs he would sell in Angora City. It was only the two of them in the Reborn taxicab, with a bunch of plants in the back seat. They hadn't met any other taxicab in this part of the road, making the trip all the lonelier. The sun was already starting to set, but unfortunately, they were still about 1 day away from the Reborn truck stop. So, they would have to camp out here in the wilderness for now. The driver drove the cab off-road and picked a seemingly safe spot in the wilderness. There were plants and vegetation covering their camping spot, so they wouldn't be easily spotted. But just as they set up their bedrolls, the bushes started rustling with activity. It wasn't long before 3 roughly dressed bandits showed themselves to the driver and the merchant. They took out their knives from their waists and flipped it around haphazardly. Its blade shined under the moonlight, showing its sharp, cutting threat. Give me all your money and we won't kill ya. One of the bandits, wearing only a shoulder guard, threatened. Money, money, give me money. A merchant. Jackpot. The passenger merchant raised his trembling hands. Didu, don't hurt me. The 3 bandits laughed. Robbing these merchants was easy, especially since they didn't have any guards around them. All my gold coins are over there. The merchant bumbled over his words. The bandits looked at the rucksacks stacked near the fireplace and approached it with greed in their eyes. You will do no such thing. He is a passenger of Reborn. He and all his belongings are protected by our authority. The 3 bandits looked at the driver, who wore a simple white long-sleeve t-shirt with a Reborn symbol and a captain's hat. Under whose authority? The shoulder guard bandit scoffed. You're just a driver. He gestured for the other 2 bandits, to deal with him. They approached the Rebornian driver, flipping their knives threateningly. But instead of getting scared, the driver balled his fists and put his arms up in self-defense. "I'm not just a driver," he said confidently. "I'm a Rebornian." The driver reached down his pockets, revealing a small, darkish brown, spherical object. The mostly bitter scent of the pellet wafted through the air. While the bandits were confused, the driver swallowed the pellet in one go. And immediately, a burst of energy erupted from the Rebornian driver. The bandits raised their arms to protect themselves from the gust of wind that assaulted their face. Once the wind subsided, they looked back at the driver. What? How was that possible? The two bandits felt a sense of overwhelming pressure coming off of the driver. It was as if the man had just broken through to the 3-star realm in a matter of seconds. That was supposed to be impossible. From the bottom of 2-star to almost the peak of 3-star. "What the hell are you two doing?" screamed the shoulder guard bandit. "Attack him." But before they could recover from their shock, the driver raised his hands and summoned a magic circle in his palms. 2 pillars of water manifested beside the two bandits, each one as thick as a tree trunk and as tall as a human. Suddenly, these water pillars gained curved blade-like arms from the bottom to the top. The blades or brushes started rotating, turning from slow to blazingly fast in just a few seconds. The bandits' knives glowed in different colors as they used their respective spells to try and defend against the attack. Unfortunately for them, the driver finished the spell. "Car wash!" the driver shouted. The 2 pillars of water closed in on the two bandits, smacking them with the force of water rotating at the speed of almost 300 kilometers per hour. It was the equivalence of being attacked by a modern pressure washer. The bandits' rag-like clothes were immediately ripped into pieces, and their armor were almost shredded through. "Gragh!" they screamed. And soon, the water pillars stopped rotating, dissipating into nothingness as the driver's spell finished its execution. The two bandits, unable to keep their consciousness active, fell to the floor drenched in water. Witnessing this with his own eyes, the shoulder guard bandit couldn't help but slowly back away in fear. The most frightening part of this was the fact that the spell wasn't even meant to be an offensive attack. It was just a simple 2-star spell meant to clean dust and grime off of an automobile. But as the driver consumed the special 35% concentrated chocolate pellet, his innate sugar rush skill activated and increased his measly bottom 2-star power into peak 3-star power. It was able to turn a harmless production spell into a ferocious shredder that could almost rip armor into pieces. What the hell?" the bandit screamed. He slowly backed away, intending to run away from this horrifying situation. The driver, still feeling the effects of the sugar rush skill, picked up the 2 knives dropped down by the unconscious bandits. He stared at the fleeing shoulder guard bandit, who stumbled as he tried to get over the bushes that obstructed his path. "Auto route to target," the driver muttered as he threw the 2 knives in his hand. His technique was sloppy and his aim was horrendous. However, the skill he invoked allowed the knives to automatically find itself driving to the target with pinpoint accuracy. After all, this was a skill that all Rebornian drivers were given once they got the job. This lessened their driving load during the day, allowing them to take their hands off the wheel and let the skill drive the automobile automatically. Now, it was used to hit the fleeing bandit directly in his legs, destroying his chance for fleeing. The driver panted. After taking a few breaths, he turned to the merchant passenger. "Are you okay, sir?" The merchant couldn't bring out any words out of his mouth. He only looked at the 3 bandits down on the ground and back to the unassuming driver with disbelief in his eyes. Were all Rebornians as strong as him? The passenger asked himself. Once the bandits were taken care of, shadow orcs immediately appeared on the scene. They thanked the driver for their service and disappeared carrying the unconscious bandits on their shoulders. Back at the Reborn headquarters in Angora City, Michael was soon informed about what happened with one of the Reborn taxi drivers. And just as he hoped, the driver was able to protect himself and his passenger all through the use of the experimental 35% chocolate. "This probably won't be the only time that the bandits will attack our drivers," Shiina said as she served a cup of water for Michael at his desk. Yeah, this is Blazel's plan to discredit Reborn and the Golden Road. All the bandits we captured this far have told us that there is multiple more groups of bandits that are out there targeting taxis. Just like Sleazy said, all the bandits that were imprisoned soon found themselves liking their new situation. It took them a couple of days, but they started cooperating in Reborn's plans to destroy the bastard bandits from the inside out. They told everything they knew about the bandits' plans, including where and when they were most likely to strike. Fufufu. Their plans are doing the exact opposite of what they want. We have seen a surge of people using the Reborn taxis to travel the Golden Road, Shiina said, showing Michael a complicated graph. McTony's is also doing very well, increasing the number of visitors to the truck stop. They're treating it as a safe haven to sleep in. Shall we start the construction of the next truck stops? Not yet, Michael said. We don't have resources to spare. For now, let's focus on the Golden Road expansion to the east. Speaking of which, how's it going? The Golden Road was about 70% on the way to the forest on the east. It would probably take 1 or 2 more weeks before people could finally travel there using automobiles. But until that project was finished, people traveled to the east using conventional means, horse carriages. One such horse carriage convoy consisted of merchants and travelers who longed for Reborn to finish the Golden Road. I can't wait until Reborn taxis can travel here, one of the female merchants said. I'm just a simple man. I just want to taste that McTony's chicken again soon. Do you think they'll build a new restaurant here? I hope so, the chubby merchant said. Once we sell our items in the east, we'll have enough money to stay in the nation of Reborn for at least a month. So, just stay strong until then. These merchants were part of the people who journeyed all the way to the ends of the Golden Road, leading them to the promised lands and the parched lands. There, they truly fell in love with the culture and the life of Rebornians. If they had enough money to spend, they would permanently stay in the nation of Reborn and start their own business there. They had been expanding their territory, so this was a chance for them to buy their own land there. Unfortunately, the only way they were going to earn enough for a down payment was by becoming traveling merchants to the east. The trip was dangerous because they had to travel to the forest of the bastard bandits, but it was precisely because of that danger that they would earn a lot of money once they succeeded. As they reached the border of the forest, the caravan stopped and waited. Usually, this would be the place where the bandits would appear and ask for a protection fee. But about an hour later, no bandits appeared. Weird. Those money-hungry bastards would have known we were here even before we reached the border. Should we go? I think we should. If they're not here, we have no one to pay. They can't blame us for that. Left with no choice, the merchants decided to move forward. As they traveled through the forest, the sun finally set and the caravan parked to camp. They unfurled their bedrolls and made a campfire for heat and for cooking. Although they were still wary of the bandits, the merchants decided to eat fast and go to sleep earlier. But unbeknownst to them, there were little spots of light watching over them from above the trees. Hee, fresh food, and I wonder if their emotions are tasty. Vivi, where are those bandits? Why are they not here? The fairy named Vivi wore a purple sequin dress that accentuated her natural curves and showed off her unblemished skin. Her wings were as violet as lilies and as clear as a crystal. She looked at the humans below with a mischievous smile on her face. We'll just have to do it ourselves, she said. The merchant's early evening dinner of porridge soup was disrupted by the loud roar in the distance. It sounded like a mountain had just erupted and caused the entire land to shift to the side. What was that? Guards, can you please check that out? The caravan of merchants employed adventurers to protect them in their travels. So when the loud, guttural roar appeared, they were the one tasked to ascertain the safety of the entire group. The 4 adventurers, 1 tank, 1 swordsman, 1 mage, and 1 herbalist raised their weapons in the air as they faced the source of the sound. Grew up. Another roar caught all of them by surprise. It sounded closer, much closer than they would have liked. It was as if the monster was already right in front of them. The adventurers looked out into the darkness of the forest when all of a sudden, the ground underneath them exploded outwards, sending them flying backwards into the merchant's camp. Soil and rock rained down on the entire camp. Everyone stood up and slowly backed away as they looked at the giant creature that emerged from the ground. Its entire structure was made out of soil-like minerals that was usually found only in the depths of the ground. Its two trunk-like feet were planted squarely on the ground, supporting the rest of its enormous body. Its upper body mimicked that of a burly man's physique, with large stones acting as its pectoral and abdominal muscles. The arms on its side resembled that of a thick tree's branches, with roots still growing up its arms. Above its body were two glowing sources of red light, acting as the eyes of the monster itself. The rocky mouth beneath its large nose opened wide, showing a crystal-like material on their gums. Grua. Its roar was akin to two continents crashing into each other. It was deep and soul-piercing. The adventurers looked up at the rocky creature with horror painted on their faces. Rock golem, the tank muttered under his breath, his voice cracking. 6-star, a 6-star monster. Their fear was not without merit. After all, their adventuring party was only rated for monsters 4-star and below. Defeating a creature 2 stars above, that was a guaranteed impossibility. Run! The swordsman screamed to the merchants. It was only now that the caravan of businessmen moved with haste. They started bolting opposite of the rock golem. But it was at that moment where the ground exploded once again, catapulting the fleeing merchants back into the feet of the rock golem. Everyone despaired as they saw 3 more rock golems emerge from the ground, each one as gargantuan and as powerful as the first one. No way. We're dead. Surrounded by these 4 monstrous creatures, the caravan of merchants thought they were close to seeing their end. They had no way to escape. The 4 rock golems raised their branch-like arms up in the air, intending to smash these humans into bits. Even the tank's shield won't protect against the onslaught of these 4 monsters. While the humans were in this state of terror, 5 fairies fluttered their wings as they looked down at the emotional scene. These rock golems were their own construction, and they used it frequently to create a high-stakes and tense situation for humans to experience. After all, their innate skill as a fairy, consume emotion, allowed them to reach down the metaphysical dimension of human emotion and use all the complex and passionate feelings they had for sustenance. The pink-haired fairy, who was slightly bigger than the other 4, led the ritual for today's fine dining experience. She danced in the night sky, letting the small powder of golden sand-like particles float down into the ground. A fairy's dust not only allowed a person or object to float, but it also heightened the emotions of humans who came into contact with them. So, the merchants and the adventurers felt the fear of their lives even more as they faced the 4 rock golems. Vivi looked at the humans and saw the chubby middle-aged man as the perfect candidate. He was the one showing the most emotions. She swooped down on top of his head as a tiny magic circle appeared on her hands. "Come down, my pretties," Vivi whispered to her fairy friends above. The 4 fairies floated down as well and chose their own targets. The magic circles they conjured allowed them to harvest the emotion and turn it into usable energy. Hi, Vivi laughed. "Let's eat." "Golems, do it now." Finally, the rock golems brought down their arms, making the humans clench their own bodies out of fear. In that moment, it was as if time itself had slowed down for the fairies. The intense situation brought a vulnerability within the humans and allowed them to see through their memories and their emotions. Vivi licked her lips as she sorted through the different lights of emotions present in her target's head. She immediately looked for the purple lights in his memories. This was the emotion of fear, specifically, the fear of death. It was the strongest of all emotions and gave the most amount of sustenance for the fairies. This was why they tolerated those brutish bastard bandits. They were the ones who regularly put the fear of death into people. "Bon appetit," Vivi said, but just as she was about to consume the violet light, a new light suddenly caught her eye. It was just peeking down below from the fear emotion. Curious, Vivi pushed aside the violet light and saw a unique and new color she had never seen before. It was the color blue, which was mostly associated with sadness or regret. However, this shade of blue was different. It was lighter, much lighter, as if the emotion in the memory was something positive instead of it being filled with regret. What was interesting about this was that this sky blue color was almost the same size as the violet color, meaning this emotion almost overpowered the fear of death itself. Vivi decided to consume this blue emotion first, curious to see what kind of emotion of memory this would invoke in her mind. She closed her eyes and inhaled with her mouth. The sky blue light in her target's mind started to be sucked into her lips like smoke, allowing her to consume the emotion and briefly make contact with the memory associated with this emotion. Now, the memory she sees within this emotion wasn't exact, but she was able to see glimpses of images from the person's perspective. As Vivi consumed the blue light, she started to see just that. The picture of a grand, otherworldly city showed itself to her. She was looking up at the tall buildings defying the laws of gravity, almost as if it was one of those spires that magicians built as their base. But these buildings weren't made of mana. In fact, they used no mana to remain constructed at all. The image soon faded, and more pictures of life in this city flashed through Vivi's mind. She couldn't understand most of what these images meant, with one of them being the depiction of a man striking a ball with a bat and people cheering loudly beside her. However, there was one clear emotion that she did understand. It was longing. It was a desire to go back to this city. And as she sucked in all of the emotion in her target, there was one name that stuck to her mind: Reborn. Meanwhile, the counterattack on the Bastard Bandits was going extremely well. Each and every time that they showed up to ambush a Reborn taxi, they would always end up getting defeated by the chocolate power taxi drivers. The Bastard Bandits seemed to have finally noticed that their numbers were slowly whittling down. The groups that they sent down for missions ended up being missing in action, as if they just disappeared out of thin air. And since no one was returning from the ambushes, they had no idea what was happening. In response, the bandits sent out more bandits per group, making sure that they had the numbers advantage in the ambush. Now, the Rebornian drivers would find themselves outnumbered almost 10-1. But thankfully, the Shadow Orcs were always there to support whenever things got too dangerous. So, to find out their progress in the fight against the Bastard Bandits, Michael visited the Rebornian prison to see for himself. "How many do we have now?" Michael asked Sleazy. "About 500, boss. But I don't think they'll send more bandits out soon. They'll know something is up, and they'll hole up in the cave." Michael nodded. "Yeah, the orcs are telling me that there are less and less ambushes happening in the Golden Road. They're still there, but they just stay in the dark and spy on the automobiles. They're trying to find out the secret why they're losing the ambushes. They won't. While they're spying on us, the orcs are spying on them," Michael assured. "By the way, how are things going here?" The reformed prisoner pointed at the numerous bandits wearing orange jumpsuits gathered in the open courtyard. Some were playing mini baseball, some were working out, and some were even participating in a painting class. "Look at them, boss. When they first arrived here, they wanted to escape any time they could. But now, they've adjusted to life here, just like I have." Sleazy rubbed his nose, a bit embarrassed. "Actually, they're thanking me for helping them be captured in the prison. If not, then they would have been stuck in their cave, becoming Flare Corp's lackeys." Michael was glad that these bandits were given a chance. Although they definitely did some horrible crimes in their lives, that didn't mean that they weren't deserving of redemption. And with his supreme skill, he even saw that these prisoners had a wide range of talents that they could pursue better than just throwing fists. There were potential engineers, chefs, and even artists. He planned on integrating them into society once they had fully served their time in prison. They were valuable manpower that Michael needed in all of his projects in the Queen's region. Speaking of which, Michael wanted to check in on the progress of the Golden Road in the east. According to his estimations, they must be closing in on the forest. He bid goodbye to Sleazy and teleported himself to the very edge of the Golden Road. In front of him were a group of construction workers using their innate skill, excavate path, to dig up dirt and stone from the ground to make way for the pouring of concrete. Behind him, he saw an automobile truck with an open load containing stacks of metal rebar meant for supporting concrete to make it much more durable. Beside it was another truck whose load was a cylindrical drum that was rotating at a constant speed. This was where the liquid concrete was stored. The on-site Rebornian engineer looked up from his paper and finally saw Michael in front of him. "Boss, hey Busker, how's the construction going?" The yellow Hobmanki engineer showed an awkward look. "Right now it's going well, boss. But our scouts further up the forest are experiencing some weird events." The engineer scouts were in charge of surveying the way for the Golden Road. They made sure that the path was suitable for construction. Unfortunately, their analysis was disrupted by some supernatural. Weird how? They would find themselves tripping on flat roads. They would lose items from their backpacks. And when they slept, they heard whisperings and incessant laughter around their tents. Michael looked beyond and saw that the Golden Road was just 10 or so kilometers away from the luscious green forest of the east. "It's the fairies," Michael concluded. "Fairies? My gosh, are they dangerous, sir?" "Probably not. If they were, then they would have already attacked us." The on-site engineer heaved a sigh of relief. "They only want the emotions of people, so they'll probably scare you in the night." The engineer was scared again. "Will we be able to construct the Golden Road in the forest?" "They'll probably harass you as you get closer. But don't worry. I'll have me and a few others accompany you while you work," Michael assured him. "Thank you, boss." Once the engineer found out that Michael would be protecting them, he was inspired to start working a lot harder than before. Back to the merchants and the adventurers. They all closed their eyes as the 4 6-star rock golems brought down their thick, branch-like arms towards them. They thought this was the end of their lives. But a few seconds later, nothing happened. Slowly, they opened their eyes to see that the giant rock golems that surrounded them were gone, with no trace of them ever being there in the first place. They all patted their bodies and felt no injury or change. It made them wonder if everything that happened was just a dream or an illusion that was brought upon by deprivation of sleep. Meanwhile, once they had their fill, Vivi and her friends blipped out of reality itself. Soon, they appeared in a world covered in darkness, where the trees glowed with a green and blue light, and where the veins of its leaves twinkled with luminescence. This was the dimension of the fairies, located in a subspace coinciding with the forest of the east. This place was like the mirror copy of the forest itself, but contained in a different dimension that only fairies could access. In this place, they could come in and out of reality whenever or wherever they wanted. This was how they stayed out of people's sight, allowing them to traverse the forest without anybody knowing. Vivi looked down and saw the merchants and the adventurers quickly pack their things up and leave in the middle of the night. They were spooked about what happened and immediately wanted to return. On a whim, Vivi decided to follow them from the fairy dimension. She watched them turn the caravan around and race off to the forest's exit. There was still a worried look on their faces, worried about those strange rock golems that suddenly appeared and disappeared out of nowhere. But as they left the forest, Vivi saw their expressions change from one of worry to one of relief. She looked beyond and saw these humans and demi-humans working together to pour some kind of liquid onto a ditch. Behind them were these strange metal carriages that looked like monsters lying in wait. And as Vivi looked closer, she finally saw the badge embroidered on all the workers' shirts. It was the symbol of one that she was familiar with from her target's memory. This was Reborn. Fairies weren't supposed to go out of the boundary of the forest, but Vivi was spurred on by her curious mind to check out what the Rebornians were doing. While in the mirror dimension of the fairies, Vivi traversed outside the forest and went towards the Rebornians. This allowed her to stealthily spy on these reborn people without them knowing about it. As she got closer, the first thing she noticed was the road they built beyond the horizon. Even she was impressed. It was incredibly flat and made out of sturdy natural materials. No magic was involved in it. This made her all the more impressed about the people making them. They all seemed to be performing intricate and complex types of magic that she had never seen before. These spells were weirdly specific and seemed to be molded perfectly for their jobs. For example, the ones in charge of digging used spells that specifically created a wide, uniform path the same as the road behind them. Stranger still was the fact that there were demi-humans in their midst. Magically inclinés demi-humains. They were even led by a yellow manki whose species were known for their inability to cast magic. Reborn became ever stranger as Vivi observed them. She looked at the metal automobiles parked along the road. At first, she thought that they were just a mere useless pile of creation. But then, one of the cars sped off back toward the road at blazingly fast speeds. Are those metal golems? Even fairies couldn't make golems as intricate and as powerful as those. In fact, it was so advanced that Vivi didn't even sense magic from it at all. Focus, Vivi reminded herself. She wasn't here to marvel at their strange inventions. She was here to understand why Reborn evoked such strong feelings from other people. Vivi fluttered her wings, shedding off large amounts of golden dust from her own body down into the ground. With a little wave of her hand, a magic circle appeared and started to command the earth mana below to do her bidding. Suddenly, the hard rock underneath the ground burst upwards, revealing a giant rock golem that looked down at the Rebornians with its red, glinting eyes. This should be enough to scare them, Vivi thought. But upon seeing this terrifying rock creature emerge in front of them, the people of Reborn showed no sign of fear or distress at all. They just looked up at the rock golem with only a slight bit of surprise and wonder. "Ah, this must be the rock golems those merchants told us about," said one of the Satyr construction workers. "I wonder how they work." A catfolk cement mixer replied, still manually mixing a batch of concrete. "They move kind of similar to those metallic arms that are on those factories back in the nation." What is up with these people? Vivi thought to herself. She had no idea what they were talking about. And even if she wanted to know, these people weren't exhibiting a strong enough emotion for her to feast on. Their reactions were mild at best. "I better tell the boss about this," said the yellow Hobmanki engineer. Michael was soon awoken from his slumber by a low shadow orc. The Orcupine ninja informed Michael about what happened in the Golden Road construction project and urged him to come quickly. He thanked the orc before teleporting himself into one of his shadow clones he left attached to one of the cement mixers they used. As he ascended from the shadows, he immediately saw the large rock golem standing above his Rebornian workers. Rock golem. These constructs are non-living beings and are purely made out of mana. Their destructive powers are strong, but are limited to the amount of mana left behind in their cores. These rock golems are usually the protectors and the main defensive force of the elusive fairy race. Once he read this description, Michael immediately scanned the area for any sign of the fairies. And what did he see but the silhouette of a very small human with wings flying above the rock golem itself. He didn't see the actual appearance of the fairy, but he did see the mana signatures of one. He saw an abnormal gathering of light mana in the sky of what was presumably a fairy. He didn't know what kind of magic they used to hide themselves, but the light mana from their bodies could not be hidden away from his supreme skill, even if it used the bright sun on the skies as another camouflage. "Boss, what should we do with the rock golem?" the yellow Hobmanki engineer asked him. "It's not doing anything to us, so we're hoping to keep it as our pet." "I'm afraid you're too late," Michael replied. "Somebody already owns the rock golem." Michael used a simple flotation spell to fly up in the sky and meet with the fairy. And as he ascended, he felt as if the fairy finally took notice of him. It turned into his direction and stared at his face, seemingly wondering if he could truly see through their stealth. There was a moment where the fairy shook their heads, unbelieving of the fact that a human could see through them. But as Michael continued to fly in a straight line towards them, the fairy was forced to realize that the golden-haired boy could truly see them without a problem. It immediately tried to run away. "Wait, I just want to talk," Michael hurriedly said to the fairy. It looked back at him for a second, only for it to speed away from him in fear. The fact that a human could finally see through them was a truly frightening and shocking ordeal that forced the fairy into a retreat. Michael chased the floating light in the sky until they reached the border of the forest. Once the fairy entered inside the territory, the light mana seemed to have disappeared from his vision, making him lose sight of the fairy. Michael stopped in the air, just a few meters away from the leaf crown of a tree. "What's going on here?" Chat JK4. Analyzing surroundings. Complete. I have detected small and minute anomalies of mana in the forest. Some mana spontaneously enters and leaves the territory as if there was a hole in the very space itself. Normal people cannot notice this difference, but your supreme skill has allowed this software to gather enough data to conclude a finding. What is it? The forest seems to contain an altered version of a pocket dimension inside. The whole forest. That is correct. Michael floated inside the forest, bracing himself to enter the pocket dimension, yet nothing happened. Can I enter this pocket dimension? Yes. The data we have gathered from the pocket dimension in Grief's tomb allowed for me to get a superficial understanding of pocket dimensions itself. That is not inherently enough to break into an occupied and protected pocket dimension. However, the fairies' entrance into the pocket dimension created a brief weakness in their defense systems, allowing me to analyze how to get inside. Michael smiled. He would pat his own head for ChatJK4's impressive skills if it wouldn't be so awkward. Suddenly, a large wave of information washed over his head, allowing him to grasp a new magic theory allowing to enter the pocket dimension of the fairies. A magic circle appeared around Michael's wrist as mana flowed through his body. Slowly, the appearance of a simple key made out of pure mana manifested inside his hand. Michael grasped this key and gently pushed it in the air, feeling a resistance that no heavy air could make. As he turned the key, a satisfying click resounded in the forest before his surroundings changed completely. The bright sun that was peeking around the leaves of the trees was nowhere to be seen. Instead, the entirety of the skies had been enshrouded in eternal darkness. So, this is the pocket dimension of the fairies, Michael remarked. He looked behind him and saw nothing but a dark fog beyond the forest, where the Rebornians were supposed to be. Flying back, he was able to see the Rebornians still hard at work on the Golden Road project, with the construction workers starting to pour liquid cement on the paths. He flew towards the on-site engineer who looked beyond the forest in search of him. Where did Boss go? The yellow hobmanky asked himself out loud. The demi-human could not see Michael even when he was floating right in front of him. This is probably how they hid themselves all this time, Michael realized. This pocket dimension was different from normal ones because Michael could interact with the real world through this pocket dimension. There is no wonder how the fairies sustained themselves all this time while keeping away from everyone's eyes. This made him wonder if this pocket dimension was a natural occurrence or a creation of the so-called Pixie Queen. He flew back towards the forest and decided to venture deeper into the territory of the fairies. He made sure to keep his presence low so as not to spook any of the fairies and provoke unwanted attention. As he journeyed through the forest, he saw that despite the absence of the sun as a source of light, the forest was still illuminated with bright, overlapping colors. Trees glowed with neon luminescence. Vines pulsated with life as the wind rustled its knots, and the grasses were replaced by these glimmering tentacles growing out of the ground. These vegetations were an exact mirror image of the real world, but altered to become a mutated version of itself. Even the wildlife contained inside this world were not exempted from this fact. Birds flew with 3 eyes, owls crawled on the floor, and unexpectedly, slimes jumped through the small puddles of green water in the crevices on the ground. Although these were very interesting sceneries, Michael reminded himself of his goal, to meet the fairies. So, he ignored the croaking of the flying frogs next to him and slowly flew through the forest in search for the fairies. Eventually, he saw in the distance a bevy of large mushrooms spread around the kingdom of this otherworldly forest. These abnormally large mushrooms reminded Michael of the birdhouses popular back in his previous world. It was the same size, and there was even a small door-like hole on its wide stalk, just enough for a bird to walk through. Finally, peeking through the tentacle vines of a large tree, he saw for the first time the real appearance of the fairies. They looked exactly the same as in his imagination. They were as small as a finger, with glittery butterfly wings on their backs. Fairies were populated with both men and women, and they were all objectively good-looking in terms of human beauty standards. They lived in a tight gathering of mushrooms around a group of trees. Some were down on the ground, while others were high up on the branches. It was a civilization of fairies. Just then, Michael saw a small gathering of fairies near the spotted mushroom plaza. I told you he looked at me. One fairy wearing a violet dress made out of vines and leaves shouted as she tried to convince the rest of the fairies surrounding her. "Vivi, that's impossible," said one of the elderly fairies, sitting in a sprout-like chair on the opposite side of Vivi. "No human can see through the other dimension of the forest." The other fairies agreed on this sentiment. However, Vivi was certain of what she saw. "There was no mistake," she clarified. "He was trying to talk to me even when I was shrouded in this dimension." The elderly fairy squinted as she looked at Vivi. "This is not another one of your pranks, right? This would be unbecoming of you." "I'm not lying," Vivi asserted. However, her reputation within the fairy community seemed to be a little bit shaky, as not a lot of them were convinced of her words. She was quite a troublemaker in these parts, and it wouldn't be out of her realm of tricks to do this. "You need to be more educated, Vivi. You cannot be playing tricks on us now that you're this old. And besides, your direct actions could directly affect our fairy race. You must be careful with what you say," the elderly fairy warned. The other fairies seemed to have her enough and started to fly off the mushroom plaza. But just then, Vivi whipped her head to the side and saw Michael peeking through the mushroom vines. They made eye contact, with both exhibiting a sense of surprise. Michael was shocked that she was able to sense his presence even when he was actively trying to hide it, and Vivi was surprised that he was able to traverse the pocket dimension of the forest. Seeing that his cover was blown, Michael walked through the low-hanging branches of a tree and entered the village of the fairies. "Hello. Nice to meet you guys," he said with a disarming smile. All fairies turned to look up at the giant creature that suddenly trespassed in their territory. Shock reverberated through them in the form of fluttering butterfly wings. "Kya, a human!" The fairies fled away from Michael out of fear. The only one who faced him was Vivi, whose sense of pride overwhelmed her sense of fear. "See? I told you guys," she shouted with a smile. Suddenly, the ground beneath Michael's feet started to shake. He looked around and saw something emerging from the ground. The head of a giant spotted red mushroom ascended, disturbing the glittery soil around it. It continued to emerge upwards, growing, until it reached a height just a little bit smaller than the trees. Two spots of red light opened in its stalk underneath its cap, showing sentience. Two other mushrooms emerged right next to it, before it jumped up towards the stalk and attached themselves to its sides, creating arms for the giant mushroom creature. "Brew!" it screamed, sending reverberations throughout the forest. King Mushroom Golem. This golem is born from the altered ecosystem of a pocket dimension, allowing it to draw infinite amounts of mana from its surroundings. As long as this creature is in its natural habitat, then it can propagate and clone its body endless times. The king mushroom turned towards Michael, raising its mushroom arm towards him and slamming it down hard. The crash caused dust and soil to fly into the air, obscuring the vision for the fairies. They slowly walked out of their houses, thinking that the intruder was taken care of. As the dust settled, the fairies were surprised to see the golden-haired boy still standing on his feet. Gasps resounded through their village. Michael looked at the king mushroom and was wary of its 7-star power. This was perhaps the strongest creature he had faced aside from Grieve. The fact that it had almost broke his absolute unity defense when it attacked him meant that this creature was not something that he should face lightly. The king mushroom used its two trunk-like legs to move closer to Michael, using its giant mushroom arms to slap Michael into a paste. Michael raised his hand and casted Fireball on both hands, flattening them to create a wall of fire. The mushroom's arms collided with the fire, with a squeaking sound coming out of its body as it began to get cooked by the fire. The Mushroom King roared Varu before it released a cloud of spores that intended to bury Michael with toxic fumes. Just then, a prismatic shield appeared and fought off the mana-filled spore attack of the Mushroom King. But it didn't stop there. The creature shook its head and continued to release more and more spores until Michael's body was shrouded in a yellow cloud of dust. The spores began eating through the absolute unity defense, with its 7-star power dominating Michael's 5-star cultivation. Michael immediately took out 4 chocolate pellets from his pocket and consumed it in one go. Suddenly, a burst of energy exploded out of his body, pushing the spores and the Mushroom King away from him as his body began to emanate a strength equal to that of a peak 6-star magician, just one half-step away from the Mushroom King's 7-star power. Any spores that tried to eat through his prismatic shields were now destroyed completely by the Unity mana within it. The Mushroom King glared at Michael before using its arms to slap its own head, creating a different colored spore that slowly spread through the air. Suddenly, the forestry started to squirm with life. The trees that were slowly swaying in the wind now moved with purposeful activity, with its branches slithering towards Michael with violent intent. Even the glowing, tentacle-like grass vegetation beneath his feet tried to grasp at him and drag him down into the ground. It seemed that the whole forest had turned into the Mushroom King's lackeys. "Go-woo!" the Mushroom King shouted. It rushed towards him, threatening to punch his stomach. Michael tried to cast Water Ball to protect himself from the Mushroom King's attacks, but a branch slithered through his arm and tried to disrupt his casting of the spell. Using this chance, the Mushroom King rushed towards Michael with even fervor. In response, Michael flashed a cheeky smile. Just before the mushroom's arms hit his body, a wall of water manifested just in time, completely stopping its momentum. Growl! And from this water wall, a large fist formed into ice and punched the Mushroom King into a tree, causing it to release some of its spores unintentionally. Michael looked at the tentacles grabbing his feet and at the branches holding his arms. His eyes flashed with a glint as he peered even deeper through its individual cells and into its very DNA. There, within its natural helix structure, were spores made out of a gathering of mana. Their unique chain link was very similar to how atoms form into a chemical molecule to achieve a very different material. And it seemed that this unique group of mana was how the Mushroom King used to take control of its surroundings. Magic theory acquired. ChatJK4's voice resounded through his mind, creating a counter-strike. Michael smiled, and suddenly, magic circles appeared around his body, with each circle depicting a reversed form of the magic theory that the Mushroom King used. Each spore around him quaked with intensity as they felt an overpowering grip around their body. They tried to resist, but their individual mana particles couldn't help but offer themselves up to Michael, allowing him full control over all of them. Slowly, the grip of the branches trapping his body loosened, allowing him to finally set foot on the ground. The Mushroom King felt its connection with its spores suddenly cut off. It couldn't understand what had happened. But just then, Michael raised his hand and pointed at the Mushroom King. The slithering tree branches and the tentacle weeds on the ground wrapped itself around the Mushroom King's body, letting it have a taste of its own medicine. It looked at Michael, confused as to how he was able to take control of its own spell. "True," it screamed, releasing another cloud of spores to try and take control of the vegetation around. But Michael wouldn't let that happen. He casted a spell, pulling a large boulder from the ground and hurling it at the Mushroom King. With its body still restricted, the Mushroom King pumped out a cloud of spores, letting it absorb some of the impact. But still, Michael's spell was enough to cause bruising in its head and stalk, with violet blood starting to leak out of its injuries. Michael casted another spell, creating a bolt of lightning in his hands. And with the help of ChatJK4, the optimal throwing position of the spear-throwing athletes in his previous world washed over his head. The lightning zoomed towards the Mushroom King, who quickly grew a large mushroom head in its body as a shield. The lightning spear collided with the mushroom shield, burning through its entire head and letting electricity course through the Mushroom King's body. The aftermath left the Mushroom King's head limp, as the injuries it sustained was enough to weaken its body. It was on its last legs. As a last-ditch effort, the Mushroom King released a puff of spores, which quickly spread throughout the forest. Slowly, Michael saw the trees start to contort and twist unnaturally. Even the ground started to turn as if his whole world was skewed to the side. Lights seemingly coming out of nowhere bloomed around him, creating a flurry of colors that was mesmerizing to look at. This was called an acid trip, with the Mushroom King's spores creating a large illusion that allowed it to secretly spread its spores to a different location, allowing it to regrow into 3 different bodies. But just as these spores were about to plant itself on the ground, the Mushroom King suddenly felt its connection with them sever completely. Michael, even in the face of mesmerizing illusions, could still pick up the minute and small changes of mana in his surroundings. He raised his hand, levitating the 3 seed spores of the Mushroom King in the air. And with a quick spell cast, 3 wind crescents busted out of his magic circles and cleaved the spores in half, killing the Mushroom King's intent to regenerate itself into a new body. Battered, bruised, and with no way to regenerate its body, the Mushroom King looked at Michael with indignation in its face. Well fought. Michael praised him. He raised his hand, pointing it at the Mushroom King. The tip glowed with the power of unity mana, illuminating even the darkest regions of the forest. The fairies were in complete disbelief as they watched the fight between their elder Mushroom King Guardian fight with the human boy. It was supposed to be their last line of defense, something that could protect them against even the most numerous of enemies. Yet somehow, this young kid was able to force into submission. In truth, the Mushroom King really was a very strong and feared monster in the world. It could defeat armies using its numerous toxic spores that even the best herbalists couldn't counter. Not only that, but inside this very pocket dimension, the Mushroom King was almost immortal as it could spawn itself infinitely using its own spores. However, it was in an extremely bad matchup against Michael, who could create and synthesize skills at the drop of a hat. His complete mastery over mana allowed him to prevent the Mushroom King from using its best weapons, nullifying its spores and basically turning the Mushroom King into a harmless cow. The elderly fairy floated off her chair and looked up at Michael with bewilderment in her eyes. "Impossible," she muttered. The rest of the fairies stared at Michael, whose finger was glowing with an intense white light as he pointed it at the Mushroom King. That is the mana of old," the elderly fairy muttered. If it was indeed the power held by the ancient people, then it meant that they had no chance against him even if they tried. Meanwhile, with the Unity gun locked and loaded, the Mushroom King was just mere moments away from its untimely death. Above Michael's head, the figure of a mechatronic right hand holding a deagle started to appear, shimmering as it manifested. It was just then that Vivi suddenly flew in front of Michael and put herself in between him and the Mushroom King. "Wait, wait," she shouted hurriedly, waving her tiny little hands to get his attention. To which Michael immediately released the power in his fingers, with the light of the Unity gun slowly dimming in his hands. The figure above his head dissipated in the air before it could truly manifest itself in reality. He wasn't really planning on killing the Mushroom King. He just wanted to get their attention and get them to listen to his words. And it worked. "You're from Reborn, right?" Vivi asked him. "Yeah, my name is Michael," he replied. Excitement poured over Vivi's face. Her wings fluttered even faster as she darted around Michael's body in a fit of eagerness and anticipation. "Really? Then that means you can tell me all about those amazing stories about Reborn." "Oh yeah," Michael said, unsure of what the fairy was talking about. He didn't even know how she knew about Reborn in the first place. Then Vivi turned to the Mushroom King, who was still restricted from vines and branches slithering around its body. "You can go now," she said, wiping her hands and giving the creature some of the golden dust surrounding her body. The cuts and bruises it sustained from being hit by a giant boulder was immediately cured, becoming as good as new within just a few seconds. "Growl," it muttered, rubbing its spotted red head cutely towards the fairy. Then it turned to Michael and grunted before it walked off into the forest, still giving him a wary look. "Sorry about that." Vivi quickly turned back to Michael. "He thought you were an intruder." "I'm Vivi. Nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you." Michael held out his hand, and Vivi grabbed a hold of his pinky finger and flew up and down with it, creating the equivalent of a handshake. "Oh, You should meet my family, she said, pointing to the fairies hiding behind their mushroom houses with fear. Finally, the elderly fairy floated over towards Michael's face, going uncomfortably close to him as she scrutinized his face. Even though she looked to be 80 years old or more, there were still traces of beauty in her face that were only weathered down by time. Her hair was white, and she wore a very regal and formal dress compared to the other fairies around her. You're a human, correct? Michael nodded. Yeah. What is it that you want? Are you planning on conquering us? The elderly lady fairy shot a threatening look at Michael. I'm not planning on conquering this place. I just want to talk, he said, raising his hands innocently. She stared at him for a few seconds, and even though she wasn't using any kind of magical spells or skills, Michael felt as if she was seeing through him with an X-ray. Could she be the pixie queen they were talking about? Michael thought to himself. Finally, she seemed to have seen enough and softened her look on Michael. I'm Virian, and I'm the mother of that troublemaker over there, she said, pointing her head towards Vivi. We should talk more, Michael. There are some things that you and I should both know. Wait, mother, she protested, pulling on Michael's sleeves. I'm going to talk to him first. Didn't I tell you that we discovered a new flavor of emotion in humans? It's because of him and his Reborn company. Virian shot a look of surprise. Vivi had talked about this new emotion they tasted, but hardly anyone could believe that it was true. After all, everyone knew that fear was the strongest of all emotions, and it was what humans feel most when they near death. So, many fairies just considered it another one of Vivi's tricks. However, she had proven herself to be truthful this time, with Michael being able to cross into their realm, even when he was a human. All right, Virian relented. However, the human and I must talk privately later. I shall consult the annals of history to see if this had any precedence. The elderly fairy soon floated away, leaving Michael all alone for Vivi to pester. Michael couldn't help but look back at Virian and saw her floating down the village with her hands behind her back. She descended into her house in the center, walking directly into her room. Before she closed the door, he saw her take a book out of her shelf and turn its page to read it. Whatever she wanted to talk to him about seemed important. But while he was contemplating on this, Vivi kept on buzzing around his face, trying to get his attention. Hey, look at me, she said, putting on different faces. Mr. Reborn. Michael snapped out his thoughts and focused on Vivi. Are you sure this is more important than what your mother wants to talk about? Of course it is. She's just stuck in the past, while I want to move forward to the future. Since she was the first one to acknowledge him, he decided to humor her for now. Unfortunately, once Virian left Michael, the other fairies found courage to fly up to Michael and observe him up close and personal. They buzz around him, awed and confused at his ability to trespass into their realm and even defeat their Mushroom King Guardian. Vivi, is he really a human? Maybe he's just a giant fairy. No fairy is this large. He's definitely a human boy. Maybe he's not a human. Maybe he's a shapeshifter. Michael massaged his head, but wouldn't be overwhelmed with 20 fairies buzzing and shouting around their face. Finally, Vivi shushed everyone around her and turned to Michael. Everyone shut up. Now, Mr. Reborn, please tell us everything about your company. Surrounded by all these expectant fairies, Michael did as Vivi asked and told them all about the nation of Reborn. First of all, he told them that it was located deep in the south of King's region, in the infamous Parched Lands. Gasps sounded out through the fairies. Really? How is it possible to live in a desert? Is that true? And there's thousands of people living there. Vivi and her 5 other fairies nodded furiously, remembering the memories that they saw when they consumed the emotions of the merchants. We saw it. Demi-humans and humans living together in a fantastic city, with buildings of metal rising up. There's lights in all these buildings, even at night. It's like the stars descended down to this desert. Shush, everyone. I want to hear more, Vivi said, obediently sitting down in a lotus pose. Tell us more, Mr. Reborn. Are there really beasts of metal zooming at speeds faster than horses? That's not possible. How could that be? The other fairies simply couldn't believe such things. Lifeless metals shouldn't be moving at all, much less speeding faster than a horse. They're called automobiles, and Michael continued telling them all about the nation of Reborn, and slowly but surely, the entire village of the fairies sat down in front of Michael and listened to his stories as if they were watching a movie. This was perhaps the first time that any of them would be interacting with a human face to face. After all, they only knew about human culture through consuming their emotions. Not only that, but the unique circumstance of Reborn greatly piqued the interest of the fairies, with gasps and exhales of surprises coming out of their mouths periodically, especially during the part when Michael told them about their cooperation with the Dwarven Kingdom. Your friend with those dwarves? We haven't seen them even from memory. We only know about them through our books. The only species that were more isolated than the fairies were none other than those dwarves. The fact that Michael became allied with them was a feat that was even more impressive than him defeating the Mushroom King. Speaking of the monster, the Mushroom King was also silently hiding behind the tree and listening to his stories. "See, guys," Vivi said, addressing the entirety of the fairy village. Reborn is able to give people such new and novel emotions that we have yet to taste. I can see how people have large amounts of emotion for Reborn. I want to see it for myself. Michael found his opening. The reason why he wanted to talk with the fairy in the first place was because he wanted their permission to construct the Golden Road. With their powers and their mastery over this pocket dimension, he could see them making the construction project 10 times harder than normal. So, it was imperative he got their assistance, or at the very least their approval. "Why not just go see it for yourselves?" he asked them. "I'm building a golden road that will connect this forest to the nation of Reborn. It will only take less than a month of travel, even less if you use our automobiles and our trains." The fairies were not the adventurous types. In their entire history, they had always stayed in the comfort of their own pocket dimension where they were the most secure. However, the prospect of seeing the nation of Reborn for themselves was at the very least a tempting idea to do at least once in their life. "No thanks," Vivi said, turning her head away. "But this road of yours is very interesting. It means that people will travel more to this forest, right? Then this means that there's more emotions for us to consume." Yee! The other fairies realized the side effect of Michael's golden road and started to thank him for this gift. More humans? Hooray! Maybe I'll taste the emotions of a Rebornian to see how they feel. Me as well. Mr. Reborn, you wouldn't mind, right? The fairies looked up at him in anticipation. Before I answer that, how and why do you consume emotions from humans? Vivi showed an exhausted expression. She was clearly impatient and wanted Michael's answer immediately. Unfortunately for her, Michael wasn't going to agree to something he didn't understand. While you humans consume food to create energy, we fairies consume emotions, plain and simple, Vivi answered. What happens to your targets? Do they lose anything? Does it hurt them? No, Vivi said. Even the other fairies immediately refuted Michael's assumption. That would be barbaric. We're not monsters. We only consume emotions and nothing else. It doesn't hurt humans, or else they would have hunted us down. They don't even know we consumed their emotions. Michael was very glad to hear that. These tiny and cute creatures would immediately turn into a horrifying monster in Michael's eyes if it turned out that they were somehow eating apart a human's brain as they consumed their emotions. And according to ChatJK4, they were telling the truth. There is no recorded instance of a human getting hurt by a fairy's consumption of emotion. So, this means that you won't disturb our construction work, right? Vivi nodded. Of course, Mr. Reborn. From now on, our fairies won't touch your people working in the forest. Can you really make this decision without Virion? The elderly fairy looked to be the leader of this whole village. It would be rude if she weren't aware of this new cooperation between them and Reborn. PSHH, Vivi dismissed. She's just an old fairy. We don't need her permission, right, guys? Michael wasn't inclined to believe Vivi, but the rest of the fairies nodded their heads to corroborate her words. So, do we have a deal? Vivi asked, flying over to Michael's hand to shake it prematurely. Wait, he said, taking his hand back. I have one more condition. You'll have to stop helping the bastard bandits. Upon hearing this, Vivi showed a look of complete and utter betrayal. She fell on her knees and despaired on the ground. It's as if you're asking us to sever our arms and our wings. We can't do that, she said to Michael. Why is it so important that you guys cooperate with the bandits? Fear, Vivi proclaimed. The feeling of almost dying, the feeling of dread as a monster stalks behind you. Those are the feelings that give us most life. We cannot function without it, and the bandits give that feeling to travelers all the time. They're an easy way for us to eat sustenance. Even the rest of the fairies nodded their heads in agreement. They explained to Michael that fear was like meat for humans. It gave the most benefit to their physical bodies, making it essential to their everyday diet. Those that do not consume fear would find their strength and their magic slowly depleted over time. Now, this was a problem for Michael. At first, he thought that just any strong emotion would be enough for the fairies. But unfortunately, they needed to consume the feeling of near death, which only the bandits could give them freely. We won't get rid of the bandits. No way, Vivi said, crossing her arms. What if I built you a roller coaster? The prospect of the Golden Road wasn't enough for him to convince the fairies to change sides. Fear was just that important of a factor for them that they were willing to side with the most despicable of humans just so that they could get their daily fix of emotion. But thankfully, Michael knew that there was more than one way to evoke the fear of death in humans, one that wouldn't involve the bandits or any kind of fighting at all. It was a roller coaster ride. What's that? Vivi asked, tilting her head. Now, Michael knew that the concept of a roller coaster was completely foreign for people in this world. So, he just simplified it for now. It's a carriage that will make people feel like they're falling off a cliff. They'll scream and shout without getting hurt at all. Vivi and the fairies all scratched their heads simultaneously. How do people not get hurt after falling off a cliff? Maybe it's secretly powered by a floating spell? Michael knew that a description was not enough, so he decided to borrow one of the skills of a Rebornian engineer. He raised his hand, with a magic circle appearing just above his palm. Michael pinched his head as if he was picking something up, and then threw that tit towards the air in front of him. Suddenly, a 3D light projection of a run-of-the-mill roller coaster appeared in front of the fairies, startling them all. Their wings buzzed as they flew away from the projection, thinking that it was some kind of light golem that Michael created. Vivi was the only one who remained and kept her eyes locked onto the rising and falling railings of the roller coaster. Since this was just a prototype of a roller coaster, Michael only added one falling and one rising section. Then, as he snapped his fingers, a cart appeared on the very bottom of the roller coaster, with a few human dummies seated firmly on the seats. Soon enough, the cart powered up and rose through the roller coaster in a 45-degree incline, slowly building up the tensions in the human dummies. And as they reached the top, the sound effects of metal creaking added to the anxious atmosphere from being this high up in the clouds. The cart curved through the plateau before it eventually reached the downward section of the roller coaster. There at the very edge of the fall, the cart slowly slowed down, letting the human dummies see the fall in which they were just about to take. Then, when the tensions reached a crescendo, the cart raced down in almost a 90-degree angle, causing the dummy humans to raise their hands and let out a blood-curdling scream. Michael's projection of the roller coaster ride was so realistic that all the fairies in the area suddenly gathered right on top of the coaster without any of the fear they once exhibited. They subconsciously tried to consume the emotions of the human dummies, not realizing that they were just an illusion made by a gathering of light mana. The fairies were like sharks that smell blood in the water. They subconsciously knew that the fear induced by this thing called the roller coaster would be equivalent or even better than the fear that they had consumed all this while. Vivi's eyes glinted with desire. From the first moment she heard the screams of the human dummies in the roller coaster, she already knew that she wanted to see this apparatus in real life. Mr. Reborn, can you make this roller coaster into reality? Pretty please. Although this was a very interesting idea that Michael would like to create, he knew that a project of this size and magnitude would require a lot of resources and manpower, which he didn't have much of. There was a lot of overlap of metal materials between this roller coaster and the automobile factory. Both needed a lot of specific and rare alloys to construct. Not only that, but the Golden Road needed a lot as well. Rebars were needed to ensure that the concrete would withstand the harsh conditions of the environment. If it was just a normal roller coaster, it would be easy. However, he knew that it wasn't just humans who were going to ride on it, but demi-humans as well. Many of them were far too heavy for a normal roller coaster, so he had to add more support to the roller coaster to ensure safety. All in all, a roller coaster for this world would cost far too much materials. If he were to start this project now, it would only exacerbate the problems they had in Reborn. I could build it, but would take time. This will take a lot of materials to construct. Vivi suddenly flew up with her hands on her waist, and her eyes filled with confidence. Why didn't you just say so? We have plenty of materials here in the forest. Really, this was a very pleasant surprise, one that would alleviate Michael of his worries even for a little bit. Where is it? Do you know a place with plenty of minerals? Yes, we do, Vivi replied, swiping her nose. The bandits are using it as their base camp. Once you give us a roller coaster, we'll allow you to use it instead. Michael couldn't help but smile. Then does that mean that you're going to stop helping the bandits? Fuck them bandits, Vivi proclaimed. I want my roller coaster. Meanwhile, in the cave of the bastard bandits, the usual lively and raucous culture of these misfits of society became eerily quiet these days. After all, it had been a few weeks since they decided to attack the nation of Reborn, but not only have they failed in preventing their advance to the East Forest, but they had also been losing members left and right with no apparent evidence to where they went. The fairies would have loved to feast on these bandits with how much anxiety and fear they had these days. After all, a fiery woman was watching their every movement inside the cave. We lost another group, Blazel grunted. How is Reborn doing this? Ueno sat quietly on the side, squirming, wondering if he should say something or not. We should stop sending out our forces and consolidate our men here, he muttered out. Shush, that's useless. We should attack them where they're the strongest. Gather more men to attack Reborn. The other bandits bowed at Blazel before going out, leaving only the two of them inside. Have you found a way to communicate with the Pixie Queen? Blazel asked. There's no way to do that. They don't communicate with humans. Ueno replied, trying to sound as respectful as possible. Tisk. Ueno took a peek at Blazel. May I ask why you want to seek out the Pixie Queen? Will Flare Corp make an alliance with the fairies? Blazel shook her head. Heavens no. The Pixie Queen has something that we need. And if you're able to give me a meeting with her, then I'll give you a first try at the relic we'll recover from her. What is it? It's a God-forged piece, Blazel said with a smile on her face. So, can we go see this roller coaster now? Vivi asked, buzzing excitedly around Michael's face. The other fairies who were also expectant of this roller coaster copied Vivi's actions and began to pester Michael. It's not that easy to create, you know. We have a lot of factors to take in before we even start planning its construction. First, we have to deal with the location. A roller coaster needs stable footing so that it won't crumble under its own weight. I have to take into account the speed rating. Michael's words entered one ear of the fairies and out the other. They were completely disinterested in hearing about the nitty-gritty details, nor could they understand his earth engineering concepts. Enough about that. Where will you build it? Vivi asked. Ideally, I want in the nation of Reborn. This was actually one of the dilemmas Michael faced recently. After all, he wanted the roller coaster constructed in the wide spaces of the parched lands so that he could expand it more in the future. However, this project was mainly for the fairies. And in order to benefit from the fear induced by this ride, they would have to move all the way to the nation of Reborn to harvest emotions. Fairies couldn't just pack up and leave their forests so easily, especially if they had their own pocket dimension here. Oh, that's a good idea. I want to see the nation of Reborn too. Vivi said, innocently. Me too. I want to see your stories in real life, Mr. Reborn. Michael didn't expect this response from them. He thought they would argue to have the roller coaster constructed in the forest. But what about this place? He asked them. P.S. Vivi snorted, waving off his concerns. It's not like we're leaving here. We'll just visit it for a few hundred years. No big deal. He looked at the other fairies, and they seemed to have the same sentiment as Vivi. He almost forgot that some demi-humans lived far longer than humans, with some even reaching a 1,000-year lifespan. Come on, guys. Let's go visit Reborn. Vivi rallied, with the other fairies excitedly flying out of the village with no hesitation at all. Wait. That easily? They didn't even pack up their clothes or anything. It looked like they were just going on a stroll for a couple of minutes, when in reality, the nation of Reborn was thousands of kilometers away from here. Come on, let's go, Vivi said, pulling on Michael's cuff. He was the only left in the village, as the other fairies were already well on their way out of the forest. Won't Virion get mad at you for going away without permission? More than half of the fairy population suddenly deserted their village. He didn't want Virion to think that he abducted them or something. And if his guess was right and she was the pixie queen, then he especially didn't want to get on her bad side. Don't worry about Mom, Vivi said, pulling harder on his clothes. She's busy looking at ancient leaf scrolls for a while. She won't get out of the house for another month. This was a complete culture shock for Michael. Fairies' lives were so long that they treated a months-long journey as equivalent to just a quick stroll around the park. Even their reading sessions could go as long as an entire month. I guess it's fine. Of course it is, Vivi assured him. Now, let's go to your nation. Michael led the fairies out of the forest. Once they were out of the pocket dimension, the fairies phased into reality as bright spots of light floating in the air. Vivi explained to him that fairies lost the ability to turn themselves invisible once they were outside the forest, but they could still shape-shift into a ball of light so that they could camouflage themselves in front of the sun's brightness. This led into a strange situation for Michael as he walked alongside 100 or so bright spherical spots of light that buzzed around like fireflies. Thankfully, though, they soon disappeared into the air and blended in with the sun as a camouflage, just like how the orcs hid in the shadows. He traveled back to the Golden Row Project and told them that they could continue to work without problems. Are you sure, boss? Asked the yellow Hobmanki on-site engineer. What if those fairies harass us again? Just then, a bright spot of light dropped from the skies and showed her true form to the Rebornians. That won't happen again, Vivi said, her hands on her waist. Whoa, boss, who is she? Is she a fairy? The Rebornians were surprised to see a fairy face to face. They only ever saw them on books or scrolls. Yep, I am, Vivi said with pride. Michael made a promise to us, so we won't harass you again. Oh, I see. That makes sense. As expected of our boss. Then we shall proceed with the Golden Road immediately, said the on-site engineer. This time, the Rebornians weren't surprised. In fact, they already expected it. Michael tended to solve problems that others would oftentimes consider impossible. Hey, you're the one in charge of this thing here, right? Can we see how you operate those automobiles? Vivi pestered the Hobmanki engineer, flying across his face multiple times. Eventually, one of the drivers relented and got on the automobile and showed Vivi and the fairies how to drive. The poor lizard folk driver almost crashed into a tree when almost 100 bright white lights entered his car, blinding him when he was driving it. Oops. Hee. But we were just curious how these metal creatures work. Are you sure they're not living beings? They eat fuel, they move, and they even release droppings as smoke. That was not the first argument he'd heard about this. For most, her words made sense, which was part of the reason why a lot of people believed in the words of the Iron Maiden religion. We need to learn how to drive if we want to get to the King's region, Vivi argued. The fairies had already found a way to drive, surprisingly. 10 fairies were on the pedals, and another 10 were on the steering wheels. Michael doubted whether this would work, but he didn't want to find out. There's no need for that, he said to them. We can just teleport directly to the parched lands. Michael's shadow spread out around him, encompassing an entire 5-meter radius. With a simple twist of his wrist, Vivi and the rest of the fairies found themselves contained inside a large dome of pure darkness, even blacker than the night sky in their pocket dimension. A moment after that, the shadows rescinded back into Michael's feet, revealing a completely different environment for Vivi and the fairies. The dense and green forestry of the east was suddenly replaced by these towering metal buildings around them. And in front of them, they saw the road where automobile cars were riding left and right. Humans and demi-humans in formal and casual attire walked along the streets, waiting for the light on the curb to turn green so they could cross. As far as the fairies were concerned, this was an alien world. What just happened? Whoa, we teleported. The fairies buzzed around excitedly as they looked around this new scenery. This concrete jungle was even weirder to them than the strange world of their pocket dimensions, full of glowing trees and tentacle grasses. Oh, mass teleportation. I would have wanted to use the automobile, but this is good as well, Vivi remarked. Just then, an older yellow hobmanki gentleman approached the fairies and welcomed them with a warm smile. His simple red robe and his disarming demeanor made the fairies feel welcomed by his very presence. This was Lolo, the mayor of the nation of Reborn. Good morning to you all. I am Lolo, your humble and personal servant in your visit to the nation of Reborn. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any needs or concerns. Most guests feel overwhelmed when they first enter our nation, so we have designated employees spread all around the corners of streets. They're the ones wearing a bright orange robe and a sash over their shoulders. Feel free to ask them as well. The fairies' eyes started to dart around the area. All around, they could smell the scent of overwhelming emotions. Just behind them in a little building, there were humans and demi-humans exhibiting pure joy and contentment as they ate a triangular piece of bread with melting cheese on top. On the opposite side of the street, they could sense people experiencing comfort as they slept soundly in cool winter-like rooms in the middle of summer. In the Lamia district, just a few blocks from here, the sounds of water splashing and children cheering resounded out clearly as they swam in the man-made rivers for the Lamias. And most of all, the feeling of tense excitement permeated through the air and reached the fairies' nose. They traced it out to the baseball stadium on the outskirts of the nation, where a high-stakes game was playing between two rival teams, the Dwarves and the Rebornians. What's that? What's that? What are they all doing? I never knew emotions could be this varied. Oh, my pixie. So many emotions. Even Vivi was overwhelmed with all the new emotions she was sensing throughout the parched lands. It was an all-you-can-eat buffet of new and exotic emotions that they have never even thought was possible to eat. Usually, emotions like surprise and contentment were too weak for them to consume. But somehow, the nation of Reborn was able to enhance it by at least 10 times the normal amount. Shall I personally escort you all to a tour of the nation? Lolo asked. Really? That would be great, Vivi exclaimed. Michael thought it was a great idea as well. He had a lot of things to figure out first before they started the roller coaster project, so this would be a good pastime for the fairies while he was out. He just hoped that the fairies wouldn't make too much trouble while he was out. Then I'll leave the fairies to you, Lolo. You can count on me, boss. I shall endeavor to make the fairies feel like they are home, the reliable mayor replied. What are you worried about, Mr. Reborn? We'll behave. They won't even know that we ate their emotions. Vivi argued. That was exactly what Michael was worried about. Just ask for their permission first. Also, you can't scare them or anything. Just consume what emotion they already have. Don't create new ones, he reminded her. Yes, yes, Vivi answered half-heartedly, making Michael unsure if she would do as she said. I shall make sure that those affected are well compensated by the nation, Lolo added, making Michael more confident about leaving the fairies alone. Good, thanks, Lolo. I'll leave you in charge of them while I go out and prepare. Michael wasn't even finished talking when the fairies already spread out like butterflies all over the nation. People would be surprised by the sudden appearance of these exotic fairies, who were thought to be only legends made by fiction, which further increased the reputation of the nation of Reborn as a paradise that even fairies would visit. While the fairies were off to a vacation or a buffet, Michael went back to their headquarters in Angora City. He sought out Kong, the chief engineer of the nation, to ask for his help on constructing the roller coaster. He was the one most familiar with the different specifications needed for demi-human constructions. After all, he was in charge in demi-human specific architecture for the different districts of the nation. For example, lizardmen don't pair well with human-made construction. Their beds had to be enclosed in a dark and moist space that would emulate a rock they used to live in under back in the woods. Not only that, but they couldn't sit down properly in a human-made chair because their tails would get in the way. They would be uncomfortable riding in a normal roller coaster, even if it's just for a minute. He also had to consider the giraffe folk, who had enlarged necks and would be at risk of decapitation if the coaster had twists and turns. Conversely, there were rat folks who were far too small to be secured in place by a normal belt in a roller coaster. So, he had to make new security features for them. Another thing that he had to consider was the ride itself. For humans and other simple demi-humans, a normal drop of a roller coaster would be enough to induce fear inside them. However, for warriors and people in a higher realm, this may not be necessarily enough to scare them. I'll send you the blueprints of the roller coaster now, Michael said as he flicked a point of light gathering at his fingertips. ChatJK4 created an easy guide on how the engineering of a roller coaster worked. And with Kong's talent, he easily understood the mechanism in just a few seconds. "What do you think?" he asked Kong. The yellow hopmanky engineer closed his eyes and began to calculate everything in his mind. It's a very interesting ride, boss. I can see how this will become another attraction for the nation. As for the safety features for the different demi-humans, I think that it will be easy enough to construct and engineer. It will just need more resources to complete. Kong used his blueprint projection skill to create a few rudimentary sketches of the roller coaster chair with new additions to accommodate the different body types of demi-humans. I'm also thinking about creating another roller coaster, but this one is more intense and extreme. I want something that will scare even the Dragonborns. Since there was magic in this world, the features on a roller coaster ride could become more creative and deadlier than the ones in his previous world. And in a sense, it was even safer as well. But boss, we don't have enough resources to build one, much less two. Kong was right. The one problem they had right now was a lack of materials to build. There were plenty of ongoing projects in Reborn that they could not afford another big one such as this. Mike sighed. The expansion of the nation of Reborn truly was only hindered by their lack of resources. We could slow down the renovation of Angora City to free up some materials, Kong suggested. Since Angora City was now practically under the nation of Reborn, thanks to the Duke spending all his time there, Michael decided to go all out in improving their quality of life into Reborn standards. The only problem was that it was already taking in a lot of materials, even though it was only in its early stages of development. For example, the plumbing and sewer system project was only 9% finished, even though they had already spent a few months on its construction. It was like a bottomless pit in the way that it consumed materials. No, keep the construction as it is, he replied. We should consolidate our influence in Angora City before the Golden Road is spread further in the Queen's region. For now, I want you to create a team to start planning the roller coaster. I'll deal with the resources problem, he said to Kong. As you wish, boss. Who shall I take with me? The Department Rebornian Engineers had about 900 members in its midst, most of whom were already busy with their own projects. Of those 900, only about 50 of them were senior-level engineers who Kong and Michael trusted that could take control of a project all on their own. 30 of them oversaw the numerous factories back in the parched lands and the projects in the King's region, while 20 were in charge of the different sub-projects in the Queen's region, 10 in Angora City, 5 in the Grafted Cluster, and another 5 in the Golden Road. I would need at least 5 senior-level engineers and 10 junior-level engineers to complete this task, boss. Take them from the factories. They don't need active supervision from senior-level engineers. As you wish, Kong replied. Michael used his shadow transportation skill to teleport himself to the Grafted Cluster, where the new Reborn mines were working day and night to support Michael with 5,000 tons of materials every day. Unfortunately, that wasn't nearly enough to go around these days. He just hoped that Priya, the Lamia in charge of the mines, had some good news for him. Welcome, boss. Is there a problem? Same old, Michael replied. My forever hungry company needs more sustenance to grow. Thankfully, though, Priya evolved to become a very specific type of lamia that could grow her own minerals and resources extracted from deep underground as if they were just normal crops. As far as Michael knew, she was the first of her kind, so the exact parameters of her new power were still unknown. All our machines are working as well as we hoped, boss. We will reach our monthly quota a week in advance, but that will only net us a few hundreds of tons more per day. Priya replied as she led Michael through the railroad in the mines, where hardworking men used their spells and skills to extract raw ores from the ground. The men saluted at Michael with their grease-stained faces before throwing their ores to a mine cart. He smiled back at them and thanked them for their hard work. "How about your little project?" he asked Priya. The Lamia engineer led Michael to a private tunnel that only she could access. It led to a relatively large chamber filled with rectangular plots of ruffled ground arranged to resemble farm. But instead of soil, Priya used a mixture of powdered granite and stone. And instead of seeds, Priya used small crystals of raw ores that sprouted out of the ground. I experimented a lot on which ground the ores flourished under. The data suggests that using rocks that it's extracted from is best used to make the ore grow. I also need to make sure to replenish the room with all 8 manas for it to grow. Michael squatted down and looked at the small rock of iron growing on the ground. Using his supreme talent, he saw the ore glow as the ore sucked out all the mana from the air and used it to create its own body. And as he looked around some more, one thing immediately caught his eye. On the very edge of the mineral farm, he saw a tiny glint of yellow light jutting out from the ground. Even from far away, Michael realized that it was, indeed, actually gold. He walked towards it and saw 3 more single crops beside it. These were silver, lead, and copper. Somehow, Priya was able to grow minerals that were not even found in this mine at all. "What are these?" he asked her. "Oh, that's just a little experiment that I had done," she replied. "I didn't think that it would work, but surprisingly, I was able to make them grow just as well as iron ores." Michael stayed silent for a few seconds, realizing the potential of Priya's discovery. "How long do you think before you can harvest all these crops?" "For normal resources like iron, it will take a few months at the least. But for those exotic materials like gold, probably more," she replied, a bit ashamedly. "I apologize, boss. It's not enough to help with our problem." "What are you saying? You already helped out a lot. Just continue working hard on this. I give you my full support." Priya gleamed with joy. "Thank you, boss." Although Michael wasn't able to find a solution in the mines, he was glad to find out that Priya's little experiments could help the nation in many other ways. Growing gold was like growing money. It would only take time before she was able to grow enough resources to alleviate the scarcity of materials in Reborn, as well as give it another form of revenue. Finding no solution, Michael decided to take a little break and eat some McTony's chicken. He teleported himself to the truck stop and found himself standing in front of the restaurant that was already filled to the brim with customers. It seemed that the customer base for the restaurant had grown even larger during his absence. Usually, there weren't many people visiting the truck stop during the middle of the day aside from those wanting to refuel. Most wanted to travel while the sun was out. But now, there were definitely more people deciding to spend precious daylight to eat some McTony's. Walking inside, the spicy and exotic scent of the dragon's whiskers entered his nose, giving him more longing for the famous chicken recipe. However, his appetite for eating was lessened as soon as he saw how crowded the place was. Most people were standing all around the occupied tables as they waited for their turn to eat. He could see people becoming uncomfortable as they sat on their table and ate chicken. Who wouldn't? There would be 10 other people standing near them, making them feel claustrophobic. But what were they supposed to do? The only way they could eat chicken was if they waited 30 minutes to an hour for their turn to order chicken. Michael squeezed through 2 elephant folks just to get through to the kitchen area. Walking inside, he saw Tony, Remy, and the rest of the chefs sweating profusely as they worked tirelessly in cooking more chickens. Michael felt bad for the little kid as he plucked out the feathers on a frozen chicken. They were so busy that they didn't even have time to greet Michael. "Sorry, Michael. We're way behind schedule," Tony replied. "Some of our customers have already been waiting for a whole candle." "Sorry, a whole hour." The restaurant was already equipped with a mechanical clock, which made timekeeping much more accurate, but seemed to only exacerbate the time pressure even more. Why are there so many people waiting inside? Didn't you prepare enough chicken for them? We did, boss, one of the Rebornian chefs replied. But they don't have a place to sit in. Most of them are even eating on the floor. Even when people receive their order after 30 or more minutes, they would have to wait even longer as they look for a table to sit in. This only worsened the congestion inside the restaurant. Some of them even resorted to eating on the floor or eating standing up, which wasn't a very pleasant experience. Michael didn't anticipate this problem. He designed restaurants like the fast food establishments in his previous life, where the occupancy was only 100 or less people inside. He thought he'd be able to solve the problem before things got too out of hand. Unfortunately, the problem of the Golden Road, the Bastard Bandits, and even the ferries occupied him for far too long that he was completely unable to help the restaurant to become a true fast food establishment. For now, though, Michael decided to help Tony and the chefs by offering his magic to them. Suddenly, 30-plus chickens levitated out of the chicken and floated in the air. 1,000 invisible hands made out of pure mana plucked out all the feathers from its skin before slathering them in a mixture of Tony's special flavoring. And with a simple fire spell, Michael burned the chickens an extremely hot temperature enough to melt even metal for a moment, cooking it to perfection in just a few seconds. Tony, Remy, and the other chefs stared in awe at Michael's amazing display of precise magic. A simple wrong input of fire mana or immersing it a few milliseconds later would have burned the chickens in a char. But somehow, Michael was able to cook the chickens to perfection without a single bit of burned chicken skin. Whoa, clap, clap, clap. Finally, our chickens. Whoa. Even customers waiting outside the counter cheered as they saw the fully cooked McTony's chicken get levitated into the counter for everyone to take. And once all of that was over, he went outside and created temporary tables and chairs made out of granite on the ground. He personally escorted all the standing customers to their own tables, solving the congestion inside the restaurant. A few hours later, the rush of customers had finally come to an end. Tony and the other chefs found some breathing room and collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath as they overcame yet another hard day at work. It would be helpful if you could do that every day, Tony said, half joking and half serious. Michael understood that the congestion of people inside the restaurant was a problem that would eventually come and bite them in the ass. The point of the restaurant was to give everyone a pleasant experience of eating while on the road. But having to stand around in a place full of people was the exact opposite of that. I should have implemented the takeout section of the restaurant, Michael muttered to himself. He was about to do it before, but he was rudely interrupted by the bandits who ambushed the restaurant. After that, he was so caught up with his business in the East Forest that he was unable to bring it up with Tony again. But now that he had some time, he could finally teach it to Tony and the rest of the chefs. I know how to solve your problem, he said to Tony. How? Just cook more chicken early in the day. But where will the customers eat? Michael smiled. Wherever they want to. On the road, while walking, while on their carriages. Anywhere. What? How will that even be possible? Michael raised his hand, creating a magic circle that rotated around his wrist, which summoned a projection of a malleable piece of paper made out of nothing but light mana. This projection floated in the air, waiting for Michael's instructions. Downloading folding instructions for a takeout box. Suddenly, his head was filled with knowledge from his previous world, allowing him to skillfully fold and manipulate the light mana paper into a small box that was reminiscent of all the takeout boxes Michael had ordered in another lifetime. What's that? Tony asked as he looked at the light box floating above Michael's palm. This is a takeout box, Michael explained. This is where we'll put the chicken and serve it to our customers. Ow! To answer his question, Michael opened the box to reveal that it was actually made out of two connected open boxes. The left half of the box contained a projection of McTony's chicken, and on the other half was kitchen utensils, a fork and a knife, made out of very thin wood material. Whoa, Remy muttered out. His eyes gleamed as he was the first one to realize the potential of this takeout box. This takeout box is not just a container, but it's also a plate as well. As long as they have this, then they can eat anywhere they want. They can take it back home, they can eat it on the road, or they can even eat it on the side of the road. They don't have to wait inside the restaurant. They can take it anywhere and whenever they want. Tony's eyes grew larger as he looked at the takeout box. He was starting to realize how Michael was able to create such a successful company at such a young age. His ideas were truly innovative. That's amazing, Michael, Tony praised. As incredible as always, boss. The other Rebornian chefs applauded. Hey, Mr. Michael, how are we going to create this takeout box? Remy asked. How do you fold it again? The little boy was extremely curious about the takeout box and immediately wanted to construct one himself. However, the answer to his question gave Michael another headache. I'll hire more workers to learn how to fold the boxes, and they'll be the one in charge of all the takeout orders. You all just focus on cooking chicken. You guys don't have to worry about anything. Even though he said that, he was the one who was worrying the most. After all, in order to create those takeout boxes, he had to create another factory and assembly line to create enough products to keep up with the supply. However, creating another factory would need more materials to construct. Just when he thought he was about to solve his resource problem, another problem suddenly reared its head. Michael consoled himself with the fact that it would take a long time before he needed a factory to produce takeout boxes. At least for now, he could make do with handmade boxes that he or others could make through magic. ChatJK4, please tell me the process and ingredients in how to make takeout boxes. Sure, Michael. Takeout boxes are made out of a material called paperboard and can be made through. His trusted personal AI assistant quickly gave Michael all the information he needed to create his own takeout boxes from scratch. The main ingredient he would need for this was wood, so he quickly transported himself to Angora City in search of Barkus. The man used to own a whole forest for himself, so he would definitely know where the best wood was located. Sure, Michael. We have many varieties of woods in our territory, Barkus said, pointing to a map on the table. If you want softwood, then it can be found around here, just right over this mountain. But if you want hardwood, then we have plenty of it on the outskirts of the grafted cluster too. To create a paperboard, Michael needed softwood. So he quickly followed Barkus' directions and found himself right in the midst of all these trees ready for harvest. He approached a spruce tree and touched its bark. I'll replant more trees later. But for now, I'll need your services. Michael's hands glowed as a magic circle appeared hovering in front of his palms. Suddenly, the tree started to shake and stir, before a force uprooted it from the ground. Hovering a few inches off the air, all its leaves and the soil around its roots started to fall off, leaving only its wood. Then, an invisible force squished the bald tree into a thin layer, destroying its bark. Then, another force from the top and the bottom squished the tree even more, splintering the tree into fibers. These squishing forces made out of pure earth mana continued to batter the tree until it was only pulp. This was the first process of creating a paperboard. Thankfully, ChatJK4 was able to create a customized 4-star spell in order to simplify the procedure within just a few minutes. Next, this pulp was cleaned and purified of any impurities like soil and sap from the tree. ChatJK4 identified the unique mana signatures and ratios of all these chemicals in the pulp and created a spell to completely disintegrate it from existence. The ball of pulp in the air started to glow and heat up, with all the impurities turning into smoke and leaving the pulp ready to be ironed into a thin sheet. Thinning it out was easy, creating many layers of thin paper-like sheets from the pulp. Then for the third step, Michael commanded all of the water mana present in the sheets to remove themselves from mixture. And as the water drains, the fibers in the pulps form a very strong bond, creating a solid piece of sheet. Now it just needs a little bit of clay for a coating layer, and Michael was able to create the world's first durable paperboard. It was much thicker than paper and can withstand great forces without costing too much to produce. It was the perfect material for a takeout box. A magic circle appeared in his hands as he drew the unfolded layout of a takeout box onto the paper sheets. And suddenly, The shape was cut out from the rest of the paperboard, creating multiple takeout boxes ready to be folded and used. He spent the rest of the day creating more cutouts for the takeout boxes, which would be enough for at least a week of service for the McToney's restaurant. Satisfied with his work, Michael used his shadow and transported him and the rest of the cutouts back to the truck stop. Tony almost threw the hot chicken pan into the wall when the piles and piles of takeout boxes fell from the ceiling above. "That surprised me," Tony muttered, putting the chicken back down on the table. He turned to Michael, who appeared right after the piles of sheets appeared on the kitchen floor. "Is this?" Michael smiled and took out one of the boxes. With a simple turn of his hand, the flat sheet of thick paper folded itself to become a rectangular box that opened like a clam. "Yes, this is the takeout box," Michael explained. "This is where you'll serve the chicken to the customers." A cooked McToney's chicken floated out of the stove and into the takeout box, completing the look. There were even a disposable wooden fork and knife included in the takeout box, allowing people to eat on the go whenever and wherever they wanted. "Cool," Remy muttered. He took one of the flat sheets and started fiddling with it, trying to copy Michael's folding movements. "I'll hire people to become your servers. They'll be the ones to fold the takeout boxes and prepare the food for the customers." "What do you think?" Michael asked. This is even better than I expected," Tony exclaimed. On the next day of service around midday, the truck stop's parking space was filled with customers waiting in line inside McToney's restaurant. One returning customer brought along with him a friend who hadn't tried out McToney's fried chicken yet. "Trust me, you'll love it." They both entered the restaurant and saw that the whole place was already filled. There were no available seats for them to eat in. The friend was immediately hesitant. "I've heard that it can take 2 candles to wait for a seat inside. I'm sorry, but I can't wait that long." The returning customer couldn't refute his friend's complaint. Even though McToney's chicken was good, they would lose money if they delayed their trip by a brief moment. It wasn't worth it. "All right, I guess we'll part ways for now," said the returning customer. Unlike his friend, he thought that McToney's chicken was worth the wait. He saw his friend get up onto his horse, getting ready to go off into the distance. The man then returned to the restaurant and prepared himself to wait for 2 or 3 candle lights. "Hello, welcome to McToney's. May I take your order?" He was immediately greeted by a lamia from the other side of the counter. He didn't recognize her, but judging from a uniform she wore and the symbol on her chest, it seemed that she was a recently hired employee of McToney's. "Can I have just 1 McToney's chicken, please?" "Certainly, sir. And since we don't have any tables for you to sit in, we'll have to make your order into a takeout," the lamia said as she took his order. The man didn't know what she was talking about, but before he could question her, she walked back to the kitchen area and only returned about a few seconds later. She came out with a box on her hand and a smile on her face. Once she reached the counter, she plopped the box in front of him and said, "Here's your order, sir. Enjoy." The man shook his head. "There must be something wrong. I just ordered a chicken." "Yes," Lamia replied. "And this is your order." She pushed the box towards him, and immediately the unmistakable scent of spice and dragon's whiskers hit his nose. This was definitely the famous McToney's chicken that he had been craving. Yet, instead of waiting until his legs ached, the restaurant was able to deliver the chicken before he could even count the change they gave him. He almost couldn't believe it. What is this?" the man asked, befuddled. "This is a takeout order, sir. As the name implies, you can take out the chicken out of the restaurant and eat it wherever you like." The helpful lamia opened the box for him, revealing the pristine and glistening skin of the chicken. He could almost imagine the crisp. "A fork and a knife are included with the takeout, so you can consume it at home or in your carriage," she said, pointing to the wooden utensils right next to the chicken. The man couldn't believe it. This is amazing. It's so fast, and we don't have to wait a long time to get a seat anymore." "That's right, sir," the lamia smiled. "Can I get another order?" the man said, pushing a bunch of coins towards her. "Certainly." It only took her another few seconds before a second box of chicken was given to him. The man ecstatically ran out of the restaurant carrying 2 takeout boxes of McToney's. There he saw his friend just starting to ride his horse out of the truck stop and back onto the Golden Road. "Wait," the man shouted. "You won't believe what I have in my hands." His friend stopped in the middle of the road and wondered why he was acting so strange. And so, it wasn't long before the customers of McTony's became aware of the revolutionary takeout boxes that would completely change the food industry in the future. Back in Kingsbridge Town, in the very first building that Michael constructed for the Reborn Company, was Castell, who was being buried by tons and tons of paperwork involving the Reborn Company. As the acting CEO, she had a lot of responsibilities in keeping the company afloat. For example, she was practically in charge of all the trade and commerce happening in the Kings region, which was quite stressful since one wrong move could cause the Reborn Company to lose millions in gold coins. But thanks to the talent and skills that Michael bestowed upon her, she was able to keep afloat and make the nation prosper even brighter than before. Because of this, she was being lauded by her peers in the Kings region as the most successful businesswoman in recent years. However, all that applause and accolades gave no sense of happiness for the talented Castell. After all, her head was constantly getting filled with a sense of imposter syndrome. She didn't feel like she had done a good enough job for Michael and the Reborn Company. She was supposed to be the guiding hand that allows the nation to prosper, but instead, she was the one hindering it instead. This was because she was unable to find a solution to their problem of a lack of resources. All the ideas and proposals that she had been thinking of were all failures in terms of them not being able to secure more resources for the company. If she had done her job properly, then Michael wouldn't be worrying about this right now and just kept on expanding the nation faster than before. Of course, no one really thought that she was the reason for the scarcity. It was normal to have a lack of materials with how many projects were being made by the Reborn Company. However, Castell's sense of perfection couldn't let herself be happy with this. Because of that, she buried herself within her office, even when Michael was asking for her to join him in the Queen's region. Sigh, Castell stretched her arms and stifled a yawn. She was about to pull another all-nighter when all of a sudden, she was visited by a shadow that flickered from the light bulb in her room. "I'm here to report a finding, Miss Castell." The shadow formed into that of an porcupine orc. Since she was the CEO, Michael always included her in everything that was happening in the company through the shadows of Reborn. He informed her of all, including McTony's and other such news inside the Queen's region. Not only that, but her status within the company allowed her to command a high shadow to become her personal assistant. This porcupine orc was one such jonin or high shadow, and she had instructed him to tell her of any business prospect that the Reborn Company would come across. "What is it?" Castell asked, not letting her eyes stray away from her paperwork. "There is some chatter within Angora City that there will be some guests visiting the southern tip of the Queen's region. It seems that these guests are considered big shots in the food industry, each one in the golden 500 ranking." Finally, she looked up at the porcupine. Her senses told her that this news was of big importance. "Who are they and why do they want to visit Angora City?" she asked, intrigued but cautious. "There are 4 visitors in total. One is a representative from the 446th rank company, another from a 431st rank company, one from a 425th company, and the last but not least is a visitor from the 200th rank company in the entire world." Castell was surprised upon hearing that. A 200th rank company in the world was just about strong enough to contend in the global market. She didn't think that Reborn would encounter such a big shot so early in their expansion. "What are their motives? Why do they want to visit Angora City?" she asked. It was at this point that she stopped looking at her paperwork entirely. She was now focused on the orc's next words. "According to our sources, they are planning to expand their business in the southern tip of the Queen's region. We're guessing that they probably want to construct a franchise store in Angora City." Castell's eyes whizzed back and forth as she analyzed the situation. "I'm guessing that the 3 lower rank companies are subsidiaries of the 200th rank company." The porcupine nodded. "That is correct. They are all part of the same franchise of restaurants." "But why now?" Castell asked out loud. "Is it because the Golden Road competition is getting much fiercer deeper in the Queen's region?" "That is our guess as well," the orc replied. "And even though we cannot get close to the heart of the Bastard Bandits, we're getting enough gossip to know that Blazelle is informed about their arrival. She is most likely to try and make them ally with Flare Corp." With the bastard bandits slowly losing their members, Blazelle was more likely to try and gather more allies from outside the bastard bandits. That was the only way she could try and contend with the growing power of Reborn. An exotic caravan, almost as large as a small house, traveled through the unkempt dirt road through the forests and further down south of the Queen's region. The carriage itself was drawn by this extremely large, monkey-like animal whose arms and legs had hooves like that of a horse. This horse-monkey hybrid skillfully pulled the caravan through the forest, going over mounds, and between trees, and even through a ravine without much trouble. After all, this animal was bred specifically for this type of travel, where there wasn't much of a road to travel on. Inside the carriage were 4 people, each one wearing expensive silk suits and robes that indicated their hierarchy in their society. They were very well off, to say the least. They were none other than the 4 representative chefs that had come to the south to expand their company's restaurants. The 3 of them sat on the seats to the side, while the last one was seated at the very back, where it was spacious enough to sleep comfortably in. They had been traveling for months now, trying to reach the southern tip of the Queen's region to find an optimal spot for their expansion. As they traveled through the forest, they were suddenly stopped by a few rugged individuals wielding knives on their belts. One look, and the chefs could tell that they were bandits. "We're being ambushed. They must be the infamous bastard bandits. Shall we pay the fee to them?" Chef Gusto. Although they were all amazing chefs in their own right, they all regarded one person even more respectfully than their own names. He was Chef Gusto, a man with dark skin, tightly braided hair, and sharp blue eyes. He laid on his side, with one hand supporting his head and one hand holding a great branch to his mouth. He was part of the esteemed Pyramidic Cuisine Company, renowned for their amazing dishes and foods that were sought after even around the world. Because of that, their company was ranked number 200 in the Golden 500 list. If he wanted to, he could show his insignia to the bastard bandits and force them to retreat. Nobody in their right minds would want to mess with a top 200 company. "We mean no harm," said one of the bandits. "We are simply here to deliver a message from Blazelle Oscrope." Gusto and the other chef's eyes widened as they heard that. It was only now that they learned that Flare Corp was able to take the bastard bandits under their wing. One of the bandits delivered a stamped letter to the window before they all disappeared into the woods, gone without a trace. The chefs delivered the letter to Gusto, who read it immediately. Chef Gusto muttered as his eyes darted across the paper. "Faircorp is offering us the territory of the bastard bandits in exchange for our help." The other chefs were pleasantly surprised to hear this. "That's great. With the large territory of the forest, we can start creating a lot of restaurants for our expansion. We'll be able to carve a large chunk of land for ourselves before those inheritors set their sights on this place. Shall we accept their deal, Chef Gusto?" As usual, they all turned to the dark-skinned chef. Despite their excitement and enthusiasm, the decision was ultimately his to make. "I'm not so sure yet," he replied to them. "Why not, chef? Didn't you want to start a restaurant that is made for travelers?" "This is the perfect place to do it," said one of the chefs. "The reason that I left our homeland in the first place was because I want to experience something new. My tongue is itching for the exotic. It is the only bottleneck that is preventing me from advancing my culinary skills. Creating a new restaurant from scratch here in the forest will serve as a worthy challenge for me to sharpen my knife. But my heart is telling me that it is not enough," Chef Gusto professed. The other chefs went silent. For them, this forest would be the perfect place for them to expand their business. "But chef, it is your company's aim to expand the business as much as possible. They would want to accept this deal," one of the chefs argued. Finally, Chef Gusto relented. "Very well. If there is nothing else that interests me, then we shall take Flare Corp's offer and establish our restaurants in the forest." The other chefs rejoiced. "Before that, though, let us visit Angora City to replenish our rations. Then, we'll meet with Blazelle and the bastard bandits to discuss this deal further." After being in a cramped space for too long, the chefs finally saw a glimpse of civilization in the distance. Angora City, the place once known for its connection to a lot of places. But now, it was just a shadow of what it once was, becoming isolated from the rest of the Queen's region. However, when they looked out the window and peered through the glass, they saw a strange sight. Angora City was now connected to 3 roads, one to the west, one to the east, and one to the south leading towards the king's region. They all looked at each other, wondering how this had happened. After all, from what they knew, Angora City had lost its power and influence from years of degradation of the original Golden Road. But now they could see the city bustling with all sorts of businesses. There were these metal carriages going in and out of the gates by the hundreds. They had never even seen this type of carriage before, much less one that had no visible animal pulling on it. If they had known about this road, they could have saved themselves some trouble and simply followed it towards Angora City. Instead, they went the long way and traveled through the wilderness that took them months to cross. What has happened with Angora City? Has a sub-company from a conglomerate already got to it first? It's possible. Only a company with that much money could pull off something as grand as this. Don't you think so, Chef Gusto? The dark-skinned chef threw an empty grape branch to the side and took another one in the basket. I heard that Flare Corp has been eyeing Angora City for a long time, Chef Gusto muttered, plucking a grape from the branch. This is not their work. You must have all remembered how Batrock Town looked a few days ago. Angora City looks far too happy for it to be under Flare Corp. The 3 other chefs nodded in understanding. Only he could make a comment on those inheritors, those sub-companies under the top 10 conglomerates in the world. Chef Gusto was the only one among them that mingled in their world. Chef Gusto, how do you think Angora City is able to afford this road expansion? I don't know. We'll see when we get there, the dark-skinned chef said casually, chewing on a grape. Soon, the caravan moved closer and closer to Angora City, eventually letting them see the wonders of the automobiles and the new Golden Road. Chef Gusto and their caravan entered Angora City. Their mount, which would have been considered quite normal in the majority of the territories in the Queen's region, now stuck out like a sore thumb in Angora City. In fact, they barely ever saw horse-drawn carriages anymore. Most of them were now these metal boxes that moved with tremendous speed and roared like a tiger. It was as if they had just stepped foot onto a different planet. They seemed to be the only ones who were weirded out on these metal vehicles. And it wasn't just the automobiles that surprised them. It was also the grand, ongoing renovation occurring all over the city. Every house seemed to be under construction with some kind of improvement, and every road seemed to be replaced by these gray, flat, stone-like materials. Angora City was undergoing a great change. This capital city has changed far too much, one of the chefs said. There must be a conglomerate controlling this, right? I do not think so. Or else we would have seen their symbols plastered on every wall and house in the streets. Then it must have been made by none other than the Duke himself. His name was Stelmane, if I remember correctly. This large of a construction project wouldn't be possible if it didn't have the Duke's permission. This made it even more likely that it was the Duke himself who started all this renovation in the city. It made even more sense when they put it into the current political context that Angora City was under. The looming threat of Flare Corp must have spurred this great change as a way to protect themselves in the future. Of course, this guess was still hindered by the fact that a duke couldn't possibly gather this much money to create this change all by himself. But when they looked out onto the streets and saw the automobiles running through the roads, it all made sense. The duke earned money through those automobiles. If he didn't make them, then he must have taxed them and used that money to start the renovation. Of course, they were wrong. They were still under the assumption that the automobiles were just metal-like monsters that the duke tamed. But they didn't know that, and they weren't all that interested in finding out. After all, they were just visiting Angora City, not intending to stay here for a long time. Under this wrong assumption, they intended to visit the duke's castle and give him some congratulatory words. Unfortunately, when they arrived, they were greeted by the news that the duke was off somewhere in the king's region. King's region? Isn't that a barren wasteland? Asked the chef. He must be there for some business. Oh well, then we should head back east and seek out the Bastard Bandits' hideout. After they replenished their rations for the journey, the caravan of chefs was just about ready to journey out of Angora City. However, Their arrival seemed to have alerted a lot of companies and parties interested in seeking out a relationship with them. Who wouldn't? The Pyramided Cuisine was in the top 200 companies of the entire world. Any business would want to establish relations with them, even if it was just a brief contact. Chef Gustiu, we have just received welcoming letters from all companies in Angora City. They offer us their greatest hospitality. Some just wish to give us greetings, while others want to propose a business venture with us. But of course, Chef Gustiu, or more importantly, the Pyramided Cuisine, was far too important to entertain the ramblings of companies that hadn't even reached the golden 500 yet. "Oh, there's one here, Chef Gustiu," said one of the chefs, handing the dark-skinned man a letter with our symbol stamped on the wax. "The Reborn Company," Gustiu muttered. They have, of course, seen their symbols all over Angora City. It didn't take them long to find out that the Reborn Company was number 450th in the Golden 500 ranking during its debut, which was quite an impressive feat. And upon further investigation, the Reborn Company was the one who owned the automobiles in the first place. Not only that, but they were the ones who created the roads in the first place. Such a revelation completely stunned the chefs. Oh my God, there's no way a company like this spawned out of nowhere. They must be a secret sub-company of a conglomerate. No, the news would have spread by now. It says here in a newspaper that they were founded in the King's region and worked their way up here in a matter of a few years. How is this possible? Who is this Reborn Company? The three chefs accompanying Chef Gustiu were all part of restaurant businesses that were all ranked higher than Reborn, 446th, 431st, and 425th respectively. However, even they felt like they were being overwhelmed by Reborn's feats. After hearing about their article in the newspapers, they were sure that Reborn's true ranking was far higher than they had right now. "What do you think, Chef Gusto? Shall we accept their offer and meet with them for a business venture?" asked one of the chefs. The dark-skinned man subconsciously twirled his braids as he thought deeply. "No," he replied eventually. "Reborn seems to be focused on innovation and technology. We have nothing in common. There is no reason for me to connect with them, for it will only distract me from increasing my skill in cuisine." As Castell worked in her office, she heard a knock on the door. "Come in," she said. The man soon entered the room, making Castell stand up in deference towards him. "Master Bart, good morning to you," she said. The man was none other than Bart Vanderbilt, the man famous for his honor and duty, and also as the father of the great Michael Vanderbilt. "Please, I told you just call me Bart. It's awkward since you're in a much higher-ranking position than me." After he relinquished the Vanderbilt business in the Queen's region, Bart spent the rest of his days helping out Michael's business as an assistant to Castell, tending to matters that she was not accustomed to. For example, Bart had heard from the grapevine that a famous chef from the Pyramided Cuisine had come to Angora City. Once he heard that, he was overcome with extreme nostalgia. After all, the Pyramided Cuisine held a very special place in his heart all because of one date back in his youth. It was where he met Lilia and where he fell in love at first sight. During those days, the two of them were completely in love, with no discernible way of separating the two of them. However, things have changed recently. Both of them had become a lot more distant. They were still talking and spending time with each other, but the spark that was once there seemed to have been snuffed out by time. And so, the prospect of a chef from the Pyramided Cuisine coming to Angora City excited him the most. He could possibly relight the fire that was once in their hearts. But unfortunately, Castell brought bad news. "I have just received word that they rejected our proposal," she said, bowing earnestly towards Bart. Bart's face saddened. His excitement was sapped as soon as he realized that he wouldn't be able to give his wife the experience of dining with the famous Pyramided Cuisine. The chance for them to rekindle their love was not meant to be. "I'm sorry. I lack the skills," Castell apologized, kneeling down on the ground. Bart immediately tried to hide his disappointment. "Hey, it's okay. It's not your fault," he assured her. The Pyramided Cuisine had always been reserved only for the elite of the elites. Even my influence as a Vanderbilt is not enough to guarantee me a spot in one of their restaurants. My brothers, sisters, and my grandfathers would have been able to, but not me. He was always the run of the family. After all, He was the youngest out of all of them and didn't have the same talent in business as others. That was why he was only assigned the Vanderbilt business in the Kings region. And even back then, the only reason he was able to get a spot in their restaurant was because his father, Eyes Vanderbilt, asked for a small favor from the owner of the Pyramidic cuisine. If not, then he probably wouldn't have met Lilia that day. "I really apologize," Castell said, biting her lips. "I do not think that I am worthy of this position any longer. Shall I ask the young master's help?" Bart shook his head. "No need to bother him with small stuff like this," he said. "I'm sure he's busy with other stuff." Back to the chef caravan, Gustav and his other cohorts prepared for their journey out of Angora City. After respectfully declining the invitation of numerous companies, they set out to the gates to travel eastwards. But just as they were about to move, Chef Gustav suddenly jerked up from his laid-down position, startling the other chefs. "Is something the matter?" they asked him. Chef Gustav raised his head up and sniffed the air. He closed his eyes and tried to follow this strange and exotic scent. "Open the windows," he hurried barked out. The other chefs had no choice but to do as he said. Once the window was open, the smell of that certain spice had grown ever more stronger than before. As an experienced and talented chef, Gustav was able to tell from scent alone that something was a delicious meal. "Do you smell that?" Gustav asked them. But the other chefs didn't have Gustav's talent in cuisine. They weren't able to smell the hint of good food from over a kilometer away. "Turn our carriage around. Go westwards," he said to the chefs. His companions were all confused as to why he was acting this way, but they knew better than to disobey his orders. So they knocked on the coach's window and ordered him to turn around. The man on the outside of their caravan skillfully pulled the reins on the monkey horse mount and quickly made a 180-degree turn. Their sudden change in directions almost caused them to crash onto an oncoming Reborn automobile taxi. But thankfully, the driver was able to push on the brakes just in time. "Beep, beep. Hey, watch where you're going." Chef Gustav didn't mind the almost accident and forced the carriage to move towards that scent. The smell was so strong that he could practically see it in the air. In his eyes, there was a red cloud of trailing smoke that was leading him towards the source of the scent. The caravan weaved through the traffic of automobiles, disobeying the road and traffic rules. Also that Chef Gustav could reach the source of that smell. And finally, after a few minutes, they reached it, just towards the western gate of Angora City. There were these demi-human construction workers who were taking a break from working on an underground project. They all gathered near a pile of concrete and stone rubble, with their uniforms all dirted and stained. However, they didn't seem to care at all. They just sat on the ground, munching on something that looked crispy and red. Chef Gustav couldn't take it anymore and jumped out of the carriage, surprising the other chefs. The dark-skinned man ran towards the construction workers, who only noticed his arrival once he was face-to-face with them. H.A. "Excuse me," Chef Gustav said, catching his breath. "What is that?" He pointed to the delicious and juicy chicken they held in their hands. "Oh, this," said one of the yellow Hobmanki workers. "This is McTony's chicken." This piece of chicken was the source of that smell. Surprise and amazement flowed through Chef Gustav's face. He thought that the scent would lead him to a high-end restaurant in the city, or, at the very least, an undiscovered gem of an eatery just by the side of the street. He didn't expect this delicious-looking food to be eaten on the ground. There wasn't even a restaurant or an establishment anywhere around here. Where did they even get that? That, can I take a bite?" he asked. Although Chef Gustav was a well-renowned chef in his homeland, right now, he just looked like a beggar who hadn't had a bite to eat for a whole week. It didn't help the fact that he was staring intently at their food. "I'm sure. Here, take a fork," the Hobmanki said, sticking a piece of chicken on the prongs. Gustav looked at the utensil. It was made out of wood, but any questions he had about this were put aside when he smelled the chicken. Oh, the chicken. He could smell the clashing and mixture of spices inside the chicken, giving that unique, overwhelming scent that brought him all the way here. And finally, in the moment of truth, Gustav took a bite. Crunch! And immediately, the crispy skin cracked under his teeth. Soon after, The white meat of the chicken brought its juices towards his mouth, giving him the full taste of its spices. He chewed on it again, combining the crispy skin and the juicy meat of the chicken into an experience that created a slew of explosions in his mouth. I never knew dragon's whiskers could be used this way, Gusty muttered with moist eyes. This food was a revelation to his tongue. Chef Gusty, are you all right? Why did you run all the way here? Is that chicken? Gusto looked at the other chefs and nodded. You must try this chicken. It's so good. The other chefs looked at the construction workers, who were just quietly eating their own lunch. They could hardly believe that a meal eaten on the ground would strike the fancy of the famous chef Gusto. But in the end, the construction workers generously shared a piece of chicken to them, letting them have a taste of McTony's chicken. And soon, their eyes widened and their chewing got more intense. The flavoring recipe of this chicken was something that even they, as professional chefs, could appreciate. Oh my God, this chicken is so good. It is a wonderful use of spices and ingredients. I dare say this is a masterpiece. Chef Gustillo looked at the construction workers and couldn't help but bow in appreciation of them. I would like to give my compliments to the chef. Which one of you is the mastermind of this delicious meal? He asked them. The construction workers all looked at each other. Finally, the yellow hobmanky told them the truth. We just got this as takeout from McTony's. Takeout? It was at this point that Chef Gustillo noticed the weird, paper-like plate that they were using to eat from. It was very unusual. Yeah, we don't have time to eat in the restaurant, so we just took it out and ate it here, the yellow hobmanky answered. Where's this restaurant that you spoke of? McTony's, right? The construction workers gave directions to the chefs on where to find McTony's. Wait, are you going to use your carriages to get there? It's too slow. The chefs almost felt offended by the demi-human words. After all, their mount was considered one of the fastest monsters available in the market. What do you suggest? Gustillo asked. Just use a Reborn taxi. It's much faster, the yellow hobmanky suggested. Chef Gustillo was feeling impatient to see this McTony's restaurant, so he accepted their suggestion and sought out the yellow and black automobiles riding around the roads. With some help from the construction workers, the chefs found a taxi that would take them to the truck stop at the fastest time possible. As the door to the automobile opened and they saw the interior, they were quite disappointed to see that it was quite cramped for them. Chef Gusto, are we sure that this is okay? Isn't it better to just use our carriage? The dark-skinned man didn't answer and just entered the front seat of the car. Seeing their leader enter, the other chefs eventually followed suit, and 3 of them sat perfectly on the back seat. To McTony's, is that correct? The human driver asked. Chef Gustillo nodded and paid the fee. All right, just sit tight and make yourselves comfortable. The driver personally adjusted Chef Gustillo and the other passengers' seats to decline into an almost laid-down position. And with just one push of a button, the chefs felt a cool air rush over towards their face, battling the intense heat of the sun around them. Whoa, this is very comfortable. How is it so cold here? It only took a few seconds before the chefs took back their words and fully appreciated the beauty of an automobile. I could get used to this. I wish we had this back in our carriage. Is the animal inside this metal from the Arctic, or does it have an affinity to ice magic? The driver chuckled. There's no monster inside this automobile, he explained. It's all just thanks to the engine that transforms. He went on to explain the basic physics on how an engine worked. As a Rebornian driver, he was bestowed a passable amount of knowledge about engines when he awakened his talent, so that he would be able to make repairs if the car broke down. The chefs, of course, couldn't understand a word out of his mouth. So they were still skeptical to believe that this vehicle ran on only a liquid called fuel. Sit back tight. I'll get you there as fast as possible, the driver said as he stepped on the gas pedal. And immediately, the car accelerated off the gates and out into the Golden Road. The chefs held on to each other from fright. They never knew automobiles could run this fast. The only one who seemed to enjoy this new experience was Chef Gusto, who put his hand out of the windows and felt the gush of wind brush past his palms. And so, the taxi set off onto the Golden Road, riding on the fast lane. The chefs cautiously peeked out the window and saw how they zoomed past a traditional horse-drawn carriage who rode on the right side of the highway. Holy smokes, one of the chefs uttered out. The carriage was getting left behind in the dust. Even the elite mounts in the Queen's region wouldn't stand a chance against these automobiles. It was only now that they truly understood the power of automobiles. With this car, they could shorten days of travel into just a few candlesticks a time. After some time, they finally arrived at their destination. In the distance, Chef Gustiu saw a moon-like radiance glowing among the starry skies of the dark night. Upon closer inspection, he realized that it was not a moon, but a glowing symbol of a smoking chicken instead. Above it was the name, McTony's. The symbol was hoisted up by a pillar, letting everyone see the symbol even from far away. So that's McTony's, Gusto uttered in complete amazement. Even the other chefs were stunned into silence. Eventually, the car slowed down as they veered off the road and entered the truck stop. The scent of the chicken wafted through the air, tempting Gustiu to come closer. You guys can go out now. It'll take some time to find a parking spot. It's very crowded this time of the night, the driver said. They all got out of the taxi, and just like he said, the restaurant was filled to the brim with customers inside. Entering the doors, they were met with a large line of people waiting in line by the counter. It's so crowded in here, said one of the chefs. How are we going to find our seats? However, just when they were discussing amongst themselves, someone called out to them. Excuse me, a woman behind them said. Please move. There's a lot of people behind you. They looked forward and saw the large line had already dwindled down. They were caught unaware that the line had already moved. It only took a little more time before it was finally their turn to order a chicken. Hello, may I take your order? The perky Lamia cashier greeted. For chickens, please, Gusty muttered out as he pushed a pile of coins towards her. The cashier accepted his order, and before she even finished counting the coins, another attendant behind her took out 4 boxes from the back and delivered it to her. Here's your order and your change. Thank you, please come again. Gusty and the other chefs had their jaws on the floor. That fast. Their order was here, just like that. Even the best chefs or the best restaurants in the world couldn't give out orders at that speed. Excuse me, we ordered chicken, and there's only a box here. Where's the plate? One of the chefs asked. This is the plate, the Lamia answered with a smile. Just open this box, and you can eat the chicken anywhere you like. She opened one of the boxes and showed them a pristine-looking juicy chicken that was still steaming hot right out of the kitchen. The chefs were completely bewildered as they looked at their chicken takeout boxes. They looked at the cashier, and she was already tending to the next customer. This was perhaps the fastest service they had ever experienced. This, Chef Gusto muttered under his breath. What is it? They asked him. This is it. This is what I've been looking for this entire time. The other chefs were a little bit surprised. Although the chicken was good, it wasn't life-changing or anything like that. There were other cuisines, much more delicious than this. You really like the chicken that much, Chef Gustiu? The dark-skinned chef shook his head. No, I'm talking about this takeout order. As a chef from the Pyramidic Cuisine Company, Gustiu served kings, queens, and royals most of the time. However, because of the exclusivity within their customer base, he never really got a chance to let the majority of people taste his cooking. When he was a kid, he had always wanted the whole world to love the food that he cooked personally, and he worked hard to become a well-renowned chef. However, that came at a cost. He was only allowed to serve a select group of people. Only those who were millionaires, influential figures, or powerful people. And if he were being honest, this was the reason why he had been stuck as a 6-star chef for 10 whole years. But after seeing how McTony's operated their restaurant and how they served their customers, Gustiu felt like he had just discovered who he truly was. He wasn't a chef who served only the elites. He was a chef who served anyone who wanted to eat. He felt like he was close to getting a breakthrough. We have to talk with the owner of this restaurant, he said to the other chefs. It's decided. We're going to be locating our new restaurants here, right next to McTony's, and we're going to emulate what they are doing. The other chefs were surprised with the amount of enthusiasm on Chef Gustiu's face. He was practically beaming, and once he was decided, they knew that there was nothing to stop him. So, they accompanied him over to the counter and requested a meeting with the chef. The Lamia cashier replied, Certainly, before she went over to the kitchen and fetched a middle-aged man who seemed to be balding on the top part of his hair. You must be the chef. My compliments to you, said Gustiu with gusto. What's your name? I'm Tony, the chef replied. And behind him, a little boy the age of 9 peeked out in between his legs. And this is my son, Remy. We are both operating this restaurant. The two chefs shook hands, and immediately, Tony realized that he was speaking with someone who was his peer. The scent of spice wafted over his nose, something that only experienced chefs would emanate from spending years of their life in the kitchen. Greetings, Chef Tony. This is the esteemed Chef Gustiu from the Great Pyramidic Cuisine, one of the chefs said, introducing their leader. However, Tony's reception wasn't all that great. He didn't even seem to recognize the name of the 200th rank company at all. Ahem, coughed the other chef. Gustiu has been invited to cook in both Atlantis and Draconia, something that only a few chefs have had the honor to do. Again, Tony didn't look all that impressed. He just kept looking back at the kitchen, worried that the chickens were going to overcook. Chef Gustiu waved off the other chef's attempts to brag. Never mind that, he said. I simply want to congratulate you on creating a fast but efficient way to serve your customers. It's so good that I want to copy it for myself. The dark-skinned chef chuckled to himself. In fact, that is why I've called you here. I want to strike a deal with you to help me transform my restaurant into something like yours. Tony ruffled Remy's hair and gave Chef Gustiu an awkward look. That's great and all, but I'm not the one you should be crediting for this. I only cook the chicken. As for the restaurant itself, my boss is the one who created all this. Chef Gustiu tilted his head. You're not the owner of this restaurant? We're the subsidiary of another company, Tony revealed. Who? Reborn. A horrified look washed over Gusto and the other chefs' faces. Regret started to settle into their hearts. Just a few days ago, Chef Gustiu heartlessly rejected their proposal for a meeting, thinking that it was not worth their time. Though Reborn was in the 450th spot in the rankings, the Pyramidic Cuisine was in the top 200th. They thought that they wouldn't ever need the help of a lower-ranked company. But now, he learned that perhaps Reborn was the key to his advancement in culinary skills. Michael's takeout option for McTony's Chicken was a resounding success. Not only were they able to solve the problem of overcrowding in the restaurant, but they were also able to bring in a lot more customers in the process. Having people eat on the road and away from the restaurant served as a good marketing stunt that made people aware of the restaurant in the middle of the Golden Road. He had even heard of people specifically traveling to the truck stop just to get a taste of McTony's. One particular day, he was relaxing in their headquarters in Angora City, when all of a sudden, he was visited by Shiina, who had some news for him. Lord Michael, there are a few people here to meet you, she said. Who are they? He asked. It's the chefs, Lord Michael. Of course, he had heard about the Pyramidic Cuisine caravan that visited Angora City. The Shadow Orcs had been keeping him up to date with them at all times. He had even heard about their refusal to Castell's invitation. Now, he wasn't all that offended by it, but he knew that Castell was taking it hard on herself for this failure, even though he didn't consider it to be one at all. Are they here because of McTony's? Michael asked. Shiina pursed through the papers in her hands and nodded. According to our shadows, they have just recently returned from a visit to the truck stop where they met with Tony. He told them to come here and meet with you themselves. All right, bring them in, he said to Shiina. The white-scaled dragonborn dutifully walked back out of the room and fetched the visitors on the first floor. Meanwhile, Michael sent out one of his shadows in the king's region and transported Castell directly to Angora City. The maid-turned-CEO was completely surprised by this sudden transfer. Young master, she said, bowing to him, I didn't expect to meet with you. We're about to have an important meeting with someone. As the CEO of our company, your expertise is needed here. Castell immediately shook her head and backed away from Michael. Oh no, young master. I was unable to fulfill the duties of CEO properly. I failed constantly. I have failed in procuring materials for your projects, and now I have failed in connecting with the Pyramidic Cuisine. They're probably going to side with Flare Corp now. Michael patted her back and consoled her. There was nothing you could have done back then, but now you can change that. We're meeting with the chefs right now. Castell's eyes widened, and before she could even protest, the door opened and 4 distinguished chefs came inside Michael's office. The dark-skinned man with braided hair immediately walked over to Michael to shake his hand. "Nice to meet you. It is an honor to greet the man who invented the takeout boxes," Gustiu said, his eyes filled with genuine praise. "Let's cut to the chase," Chef Gustiu said, sitting down at the table opposite Michael. "I want to establish our new restaurant on your Golden Road." Michael wasn't surprised. It seemed that the dark-skinned chef was able to see through the potential of a fast food restaurant. "I guess there's merit to him being one of the top chefs in his company," Michael thought. "Rejoice," one of the chefs beside Gustiu proclaimed. "Having Chef Gustiu's restaurant established in your territory is a privilege that many people would kill to have. Now, shall we talk about the split of profits and the fees? We propose that we will pay a 0.5% fee of profits to the Reborn company in exchange for using your territory as the base of a restaurant." But before the other chefs could start the discussions, Michael raised his hand, stopping the conversation dead in its tracks. "Wait," he said. "I haven't agreed yet." His words were like an alien language to the 3 chefs. If a top chef from a 200th ranked company in the world asked to establish a restaurant in your territory, then you should accept it without a second thought. But it seemed that Michael didn't get this memo. "Are you saying you reject Chef Gusto?" they asked Michael. "I didn't say that. I'm simply saying that the negotiations aren't over. I haven't heard much of an offer from you yet." They were even more flabbergasted upon hearing that. It was supposed to be the other way around. Michael should be the one try to convince Chef Gustiu to cook in his territory. Yet, Michael was the one talking like he was the one to be wooed. "It's not only his name that he carries, but also the brand of the pyramidic cuisine," argued one of the chefs. "Not only that, but all the subsidiaries under the pyramidic cuisine will follow suit with his move. Our companies are all ranked in the lower 400 spot, which is, respectfully, higher than Reborn. You should be the one trying to add benefits to this agreement to satisfy Chef Gustiu's liking." Michael remained calm while the 3 chefs tried to argue with him. "And why would I do that?" Michael asked, leaning on his chair, relaxed. "I know just how valuable that spot would be in the future. The truck stop will be visited by millions of people every month." Then, Michael gestured for Shiina to come closer and bring the paper she had been holding in her hands. She spread it around the table, letting Gustiu and the chefs see all the different offers Reborn got just today. "You guys are not the only ones who have noticed the popularity of McTony's. Almost every restaurant in Angora City is begging me to let them have a spot in the truck stop. And with what they're offering, I see no reason for you to have a spot over them." The chefs frantically looked over the contract applications. Their eyes widened when they saw the figures. A 20-year locked lease? Profit sharing? One is even willing to be your subsidiary? They couldn't believe how much these restaurants were willing to offer just to have a spot in the truck stop. "In fact, I shouldn't even be entertaining your offers. Didn't you reject my CEO's offer when she asked you to meet with her? I recall your letter calling it a waste of time." The other chefs cringed, regretting the words they sent on that letter. They were acting with the pride of a ranked 200th company, so they thought that they could get away with such harsh words without any consequences. "Chefs, Michael is right," Gustiu nodded, aware of his own mistakes. "We're the ones who should be begging to be let inside the truck stop business. You saw how even this single McTony's is beating even our best restaurants in terms of customers. It will only grow more in the future." Michael gave him a nod of approval. It seemed that this Chef Gustiu wasn't as bad as he thought. He was a level-headed thinker who didn't let his pride get in the way of his reasoning. "I do not apologize for rejecting the meeting with her, but I do apologize for saying that it is a waste of time," Chef Gustiu said. "I'm not the one that you should say that to," Michael said. "You guys should talk to her." He pointed at Castell, who had been listening to the conversation behind Michael's chair. "Who is she?" one of the chefs asked. "She's the one you should be trying to curry favor with. She's my CEO." Michael got up from his chair and pushed Castell to sit directly opposite the chefs. All of them were surprised. Castell didn't expect to be put in the hot seat, and the chefs were surprised that she held such a high spot in the Reborn company. They didn't think that a CEO would wear a maid's uniform of all things. Young master, Castell whispered hurriedly to Michael. You should be the one negotiating with them. I'm not qualified to do it. But instead, Michael just gave her a reassuring pat and a smile. She'll be negotiating on my behalf. Don't underestimate her, or you'll find yourself selling even your own left foot without even knowing it, he said, winking. Castell, being put in such a high-stakes position, couldn't help but fiddle her fingers while the four chefs stared at her. Okay, we'll relent. Our company will pay a 2-year lease up front and a locked contract for another 3 more years, one of the chefs said, standing up to try and intimidate Castell. The CEO of Reborn tapped her fingers anxiously before she slammed her hands on the table, surprising the chefs. Not enough, Castell shouted. Michael smiled as he watched on the sidelines. Castell's talent in business was finally showing its fruit. She had only been hindered by her low self-esteem because of her low upbringing, but he knew that she would overcome it in the end and turn into the ruthless businesswoman that he knew she could become. Her intuition as she navigated through the negotiations were top-notch. The chefs were left completely stunned as she took more than what they were prepared to bargain for. In the end, the chefs would get a permanent spot in the truck stop right now. If they wanted a spot for the future truck stops, then they would have to negotiate with Castell again. Not only that, but they would have to use Reborn products for their restaurant. They would use concrete, they would use ingredients bought from Reborn, and they would also buy automobiles to transport those ingredients to the restaurant itself. As for their payment, Castell perfectly negotiated a very favorable deal for Reborn. They would pay them in terms of materials and resources. Even Michael was excited as she gave them this ultimatum. It immediately solved all their problems about their lack of materials. More automobile construction, more golden roads, more truck stops, and most importantly, they could finally build the roller coaster that had been stuck in Michael's head for a long time. After the one-sided negotiations with the chefs, Castell was left extremely happy with the result. She was practically glowing, skipping as she did the paperwork on her desk. All in all, Michael was extremely pleased with the outcome. First of all, they had allied themselves with a 200th ranked company. Second, they were able to extract more resources out of them to fuel their ever-growing expansion. And third, and most important of all, Castell had gained back her confidence as a CEO. She had proven to him and herself that she could handle these high-stakes negotiations even better than him. Now, Michael was sure that Castell would become another unstoppable force in the Reborn company that would help him tackle the Queen's region as they expanded further north. It will be a pleasure to work with you, said Chef Gusteau, shaking hands with Michael. I think so too, he replied. Since you are a friend of Reborn, consider our headquarters your own home. You can stay here while we build your new residence in Angora City. That was also included in their benefits. Reborn would have to help them create their restaurants and their homes here in the southern tip of the Queen's region. They would have to pay for the whole thing, of course. I think it's better if we visit the truck stop first. It will be good to be acquainted with Chef Tony and his restaurant. Michael nodded, agreeing with the man's humbleness in defeat. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll have to console my chefs, Gustia said, walking towards the 3 other chefs who looked quite downtrodden after the negotiations. They didn't know how they're going to explain to their own companies how they let Castell take so many benefits from a negotiation. This left them quite depressed despite the conclusion of the negotiation. Michael's meeting with Chef Gusteau caused quite a stir within the companies in Angora City as well as the other territories. It became apparent that an agreement had been made between the two of them when they saw Chef Gusteau and the other chefs getting escorted by Rebornians and staying in Rebornian territories. It made the news again. Somehow, the 450th ranked company was able to strike a deal with a 200th ranked company. After a little more digging, many people found out about the nature of this deal. It was a spot in the truck stop. Many people have been quite aware of McTony's success at this point, and they were all interested in becoming a part of it. However, once they found out that even the famous pyramidic cuisine was interesting, the frenzy increased to massive levels. Castell was bombarded with more requests for a spot in the truck stop. However, there were only about 20 slots in the truck stop, and about 50 were all vying for one. As expected of Castell, She was able to leverage this demand to squeeze more benefits from those who want a spot. She was able to include a resources clause within the agreement, which required all parties to fund building construction with their own materials and a little bit extra for Reborn. All in all, Michael found himself having enough resources to fund all of his projects and more for the future. This was extremely good news. Meanwhile, in the depths of the forest east of Angora City, the hideout of the Bastard Bandits was getting lit aflame by a very angry woman because of some bad news she had just discovered. "What? How is this possible?" she screamed, fire almost manifesting behind her. "They were able to snatch Chef Gus Stew from right under our noses. We even offered them this whole forest." What did Reborn offer them? The Bastard Bandits were silent. They knew nothing. They were unable to spy on the Reborn company despite all their efforts. The only reason they were able to find out about this news was because it was written in the newspapers of Angora City. Ueno waited for a few seconds and delivered her another blow. Some of our bandits found out that Reborn has started their construction of the Golden Road in the forest. Blazel turned to him with a glare. "That is it," she roared. "I'm declaring an all-out war against Reborn. Use all our forces to destroy any progress they have with their Golden Road." Ueno scratched the stump on his missing hand. "Almost half of us are already missing." Those bandits who tried to attack Reborn had all gone missing, never to return. And it was all thanks to Blazel and her idiotic move of fighting outside the forest. "I don't care. Do it or else I'll burn all of you myself," she warned. Ueno pursed his lips and walked out of her room. Regrettably, he would have to send more of his men out there fighting a losing battle. Meanwhile, Michael felt extremely pleased and immediately teleported himself back to the nation of Reborn. He was welcomed by Lolo, who reported to him about all the fairy shenanigans while he was gone. As expected, they had gone on an eating spree and consumed any emotion they could sense. Locals and tourists alike found themselves being victims of pranks, mostly harmless, to induce emotions within them. They would report seeing strange lights hovering above them, whispering and egging them on to do things even late at night. "Sai, where's Vivi?" he asked Lolo. The Yellow Hobmanky Sr. led Michael to the baseball arena, where a game was currently ongoing. It was already night, and the stadium lights were on full blast as two teams battled it out. It was the Kingsbridge Drivers versus the fan-favorite Engineers. The Kingsbridge Drivers were considered to be the lesser of the two since their team had just recently formed. Compared to the Engineers who had been practicing since baseball started, their skill level was definitely lacking. However, when Michael looked at the large scoreboard, he was surprised to see the Drivers leading 7-4 in the ninth inning. There were crying and shouts of disappointment as the fan-favorite star player from the Engineers missed another ball. It was quite strange for him to perform this badly. And sure enough, Michael saw the culprit for this whole ordeal. Unbeknownst to the disappointed crowd and the players, there were these small spots of light wandering around the baseball field. Whenever a ball would be pitched, one of those lights would alter the trajectory at the last second, forcing the batter to miss the hit or the outfielder to catch the ball. The fairies were making the Engineers lose. Now, it was pretty obvious why they were doing this. Even when he was not a fairy himself, he could sense the massive disappointment and sadness within the crowd. It was a feast for the fairies. Thankfully, this was just an exhibition game and the standings didn't matter. But still, the fairies had crossed a line. Immediately, he entered the dugout of the Engineers. Everyone was surprised to see him and bowed to his presence. He kept walking until he was face to face with the star player of the team. Then, he reached for the guy's cap and pinched it, revealing a sneaky little fairy hiding beneath it. It was Vivi.